4 years after my husband vanished, his mother threw my daughter and me out of the mansion in the middle of a freezing October rain. "You've taken enough from this family," she said, watching the iron gate slam behind us. At 1:20 a.m., I stood at the train station with a dead phone, two soaked suitcases, and my child shivering against me. Then a black SUV stopped beside us. The driver rolled down the window and said, "Get in. There are things about your husband that family never wanted you to know." This story starts quietly, but it won't leave you unchanged. Before we dive in, leave a comment and let me know. Have you ever discovered something about your family that changed everything, yes or no? Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs today. Some details have been adjusted for storytelling. The message, the heart of this story, is what matters most. The wine glass left Zyla's hand in what felt like slow motion, and in the 2 seconds before crystal met marble, I knew my life was about to shatter alongside it. At 36, I'd learned to read a room the way I read balance sheets line by line, looking for the discrepancies that told the real story. Standing at the edge of the Whitfield Estates Grand Hall on October 10th, watching my 10-year-old daughter navigate the minefield of her grandparents' judgment, my forensic accountant's mind was already cataloging exits. Zyla clutched her worn plush bear under one arm, the other hand reaching too eagerly for the sparkling cider the servers had poured into actual wine glasses because Myrtle Whitfield insisted even children should learn proper etiquette. The bear, threadbare and loved past recognition, had been her comfort object since her father disappeared 4 years ago. The glass tipped. Red liquid arced across white marble in a crimson spray that looked like arterial evidence at a crime scene. "Clumsy child," Myrtle said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. 63 and draped in silk that cost more than my monthly rent, she delivered her cutting remarks with the precision of a scalpel. Just like her mother, no grace, no breeding. I moved toward Zyla, but a woman I'd never seen before stepped back from the spreading wine pool, and the movement changed everything. The necklace caught the chandelier light as she turned 18-karat gold with a custom pendant that I'd watched my husband sketch on graph paper 7 years ago. The initials AW were engraved in his handwriting, the letters flowing with the distinctive slant he'd learned from his architect grandfather. It should have been locked in Alaric's private safe, the one I didn't have the combination to, the one that sat 4 floors above us in the estate's east wing, supposedly untouched since the night he vanished. "Where did you get that?" The words came out quieter than I intended, but the woman heard them. She was 33, maybe younger, with the kind of elegant posture that came from private schools and country club summers. Her hand moved to the pendant, a reflexive gesture that told me she knew exactly what she was wearing and what it meant. "It was a gift," she said, meeting my eyes with practiced neutrality, "from someone who valued quality." "A nuke," Myrtle interrupted, gliding between us like a silk-wrapped barricade. "Don't let the mess disturb you. Some people's children simply lack proper training." Anouk Garrett. I filed the name away with the same methodical precision I used for financial discrepancies. Unknown woman, wearing my husband's custom jewelry, acting familiar enough with my in-laws to be addressed by first name only. Zyla was crying now, silent tears tracking down cheeks that had learned too young that grandmothers could be colder than winter rain. I knelt beside her, ignoring the wine soaking into my dress, pulling her close enough to feel her heartbeat against my ribs. "It's okay," I whispered. "Accidents happen." But looking up at the necklace still gleaming against Anouk's throat, I knew this was no accident. How was a woman my husband supposedly never mentioned wearing the one piece of jewelry he'd sworn would stay in the family vault until our daughter turned 18? The gala continued around us, conversations resuming, servers arriving with towels and apologies, but Myrtle's eyes stayed fixed on me with an intensity that felt less like anger and more like calculation. Rufus Whitfield stood behind her, 66, and perpetually averting his gaze, a man who'd mastered the art of silent complicity over 4 decades of marriage. "We need to talk," Myrtle said, her voice dropping to a register that only I could hear, "privately." The private conversation lasted 6 minutes in the estate's library. Myrtle's rage felt surgically precise, each word calibrated for maximum damage. "You are no longer welcome in this house," she said, her voice like ice over steel. "You and that child out. Now." It was an accident, I said, disbelief making my words slow. She's 6 years old. I don't want to see your face on this property again. Myrtle stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, something French and expensive that probably cost more than my car payment. You've taken enough from this family. The irony would have been laughable if my hands weren't shaking. I'd taken nothing. I'd given 3 years of my life to maintaining this estate after Alaric vanished, managing the household accounts, organizing the charitable foundations, playing the dutiful widow to a man who might not even be dead. But looking at Myrtle's face, at the cold satisfaction in her eyes, I understood this wasn't about wine or accidents or even basic human decency. This was an expulsion. Calculated, premeditated, executed with the same precision I'd once used to trace money laundering schemes through shell corporations. By 11:40 p.m., our suitcases were on rain-slicked asphalt outside the estate's iron gates. I'd packed in 17 minutes while Zyla sat on the bed still clutching that bear, her eyes too wide and too knowing for 6 years old. The October rain came down in sheets that felt personal, like the weather itself had turned against us. Zyla pressed against my side, shivering in the thin jacket she'd outgrown 2 months ago, the one I kept meaning to replace when the forensic consulting work picked up. Inside the estate, warm lights glowed from every window. I could see silhouettes moving through the grand hall where we'd stood 2 hours ago, where Anouk Garrett had worn a dead man's jewelry and smiled. The heavy iron gate slammed shut behind us with a finality that echoed through the empty street. I pulled Zyla closer, her small body trembling against mine, and felt something shift in my accountant's brain. The same instinct that had made me good at finding hidden assets and buried transactions. If they wanted me gone this badly, I was holding something they feared. I just had no idea what that thing was, or who was watching from the darkness waiting to tell me. But standing in the freezing rain with nowhere to go and my daughter's heartbeat steady against my ribs, I made a decision that would define the next 8 weeks of our lives. I was going to find out exactly what I held, and I was going to make them regret every second they'd spent underestimating the woman they'd just thrown into the storm. The train to Charlotte took 40 minutes. By the time we stumbled onto platform 3 at 1:20 a.m., my dress was still damp and my phone battery had died somewhere between Asheville and desperation. The black SUV's headlights cut through the train station's flickering neon like a scalpel. My first thought, still clutching Zyla, was that the in-laws had sent someone to finish what the rain couldn't. The driver stepped out, 37, dark jeans, leather jacket. He moved with the precision of someone who'd been tracking us for hours. "You think he cheated and abandoned you, don't you?" His voice carried no preamble. "He isn't dead." My forensic brain cataloged him instantly. Height 6'1", athletic build, eyes matching Alaric's distinctive gray-green but harder. The jawline, the shoulders, family resemblance unmistakable once you saw it. "Who are you?" I pulled Zyla closer. "How did you know we'd be here?" "I'm the brother they pretend doesn't exist." He gestured toward the SUV. "And I've been monitoring their communications since the day Alaric vanished. Get in. We have maybe 20 minutes before they check the train manifests." Benedict Delaney. The name surfaced from a conversation 4 years ago, Rufus mentioning a son from his first marriage written out of the will after choosing forensic psychology over corporate law. The family disappointment. Zyla looked up at me, too tired for suspicion. Her bear dripped rainwater onto concrete. "We don't know you," I said, but my feet were already moving because the alternative was standing under fluorescent lights waiting for worse options. "You don't know them either," Benedict said quietly. "Not really, but you're about to." The leather seats were warm. Zyla fell asleep before we'd made it 3 blocks. "Where are we going?" I watched city lights blur past tinted windows. Somewhere they can't track. A penthouse leased through a legal source outside their network. Multi-layered digital locks, closed-circuit cameras, no paper trail. Why would a man the family never mentioned know the exact train platform where 2 desperate people would collapse at 1:20 a.m.? I didn't ask. Zila's breathing had steadied, and I couldn't risk waking her for paranoia. We arrived at the high-rise as dawn painted Charlotte's skyline gray and amber. 25th floor. Benedict used 3 key cards through building security, then a biometric scanner at the penthouse door. The space looked architectural magazine perfect, floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a kitchen worth more than I'd made last year. But what caught my attention was the table. A sealed USB drive sat next to a handwritten note on cream paper. First rule, Benedict said, engaging two deadbolts and a chain. No outbound calls, not to your parents, not to friends, not to anyone. They're tracking everything. Cell towers, credit cards, library computers. My parents don't even know we left, I said, staring at the USB. Benedict held up the note, do not open without a witness present. What's on it? The question came out steadier than I felt. Evidence. But if we open it wrong, it becomes inadmissible. We need someone who understands chain of custody, an attorney with criminal litigation experience, preferably one the family hasn't compromised. My hands shook. I pressed them flat against my thighs. You said he isn't dead. How do you know? Benedict pulled out his phone, showed me a financial transaction log, offshore account transfers coded but traceable. Because someone's been paying his cell phone bill for 4 years, he said quietly. And the money's coming from accounts only 3 people control: Rufus Myrtle and their attorney Oscar Hampton. The room tilted. I sat down hard. They knew where he was. They'd always known. Zyla stirred against my shoulder. I smoothed her hair automatically. Why would they keep him alive? I asked. Benedict's expression went cold. That's what the USB will tell us, but I needed you somewhere safe first. Hope felt dangerous, like touching a live wire when your hands were still wet from the rain. I stared at the sealed USB drive, at the handwritten warning. My instincts screamed that evidence requiring witness protocol meant prosecution. Whatever was inside wasn't just family secrets, it was criminal. But whose crimes? And could I trust the estranged half-brother who'd appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right resources, or was this another trap? Benedict stood by the window watching the street below. They'll come looking, he said quietly. Maybe not today, but soon. We need to move fast. He turned to face me. Do you know a lawyer you can trust? Absolutely. Someone with no connection to the Whitfield family money. I thought of Lydia Brennan, the attorney who'd handled my mother's estate 3 years ago. Sharp, methodical, and broke enough that she couldn't be bought. Maybe, I said, but I need to know what I'm asking her to witness before I drag someone else into this. Benedict's smile didn't reach his eyes. You're already in it. You were in it the moment you married him. The question isn't whether you're involved, it's whether you're going to fight back. I looked at Zyla, sleeping against my side, at the USB drive on the table, at the man who claimed to be family, but might be something worse. The forensic accountant in me knew that evidence requiring chain of custody wasn't gathered for leverage, it was gathered for conviction, which meant someone in the Whitfield family had committed crimes serious enough to prosecute. And Benedict wanted me to be the one to open that door. The question was whether opening it would free us or bury us deeper. I'll call Lydia, I said finally. But if this is a setup, if you're working with them, then you're already dead. Benedict interrupted, his voice flat. They expelled you in the rain with a 6-year-old child and nowhere to go. I'm not the one you need to be afraid of. He was right, and that terrified me more than anything else. Because if the estranged half-brother was my best option for survival, then the family I'd married into was far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. And the USB drive sitting on that table was about to prove exactly how dangerous. I just had to decide if I was ready to know the truth or if some truths were better left sealed. I called Lydia Brennan at 9:47 a.m. By 10:15, Benedict had his laptop open on the safehouse coffee table, the sealed USB drive now connected via a forensic write blocker that preserved its legal integrity. Benedict's finger hovered over the play button for 3 full seconds before he spoke. What you're about to see has been edited, he said quietly, but the metadata doesn't lie about who did the cutting. Zyla was still asleep in the penthouse's second bedroom. The morning light through floor-to-ceiling windows made everything look deceptively peaceful. Benedict clicked play. The footage was grainy security camera quality from what looked like the estate's private study. The timestamp read March 14, 2021, 11:34 p.m. 4 years and 7 months ago. 6 months before Alaric disappeared. The video began mid-sentence. Nothing to do with this. Alaric said, his voice tight with controlled anger. He stood near the fireplace, shoulders rigid. You brought her into it, you and Mother. Rufus sat in the wing-back chair, drink in hand, his expression cold. Watch your tone. We're protecting the family assets. By manufacturing evidence, Alaric's voice rose. By staging photographs, she's my wife. She's a forensic accountant, Rufus interrupted, and she's gotten too close to the offshore structures. If she keeps digging, the audio cut out. Not static, not interference, clean silence like someone had muted the microphone with surgical precision. Benedict paused the video. Here, watch the timestamp. He pointed to the numbers in the corner. 11:34:17 p.m. jumped directly to 11:34:22 p.m. 5 seconds vanished. Someone with administrator access deleted the beginning, Benedict said. Whoever did it was smart enough to scrub the file, but not smart enough to fake continuous timestamps. My forensic accountant brain was already cataloging possibilities. Who has administrator access to estate security? Rufus, Myrtle, their attorney Oscar Hampton. Benedict's jaw tightened. And technically Alaric did, but he's not the one who edited this. He clicked play again. The audio returned. Alaric was closer to the camera now, his face visible in profile. If I disappear, he started to say. The screen went black. Not a fade, not a technical glitch. The kind of black that happens when someone physically unplugs a recording device. The timestamp showed 11:37:43 p.m. 3 minutes and 26 seconds of footage, with 5 seconds surgically removed from the middle. That's it. My voice sounded hollow. That's all that survived. That's all they left, Benedict corrected. But it's enough to prove 3 things. Alaric knew something was coming. The family was actively working against you, and someone thought deleting 5 seconds was worth the risk of leaving forensic evidence. What 5 seconds of video could be so damning that someone with full system access would risk leaving forensic evidence of the deletion? I stared at the frozen black screen, my mind running through scenarios. What had Rufus said in those missing seconds? What had Alaric been about to reveal before the argument escalated? We need the original file, I said, or at least a backup that shows what was cut. Which means we need access to estate servers. Benedict closed the laptop. And that's where Lydia comes in. If anyone can get a court order for digital discovery, it's her. 2 hours later, we sat across from Lydia Brennan in a corner booth at Rosewood Diner, the kind of place where lawyers met clients who couldn't afford their actual offices. She was 46, with steel gray hair pulled into a precise bun, and the unsettling habit of delivering catastrophic news with the calm of someone reading a grocery list. She'd already reviewed the footage on Benedict's encrypted tablet. Interesting, she said, sipping coffee that smelled like burned ambition. But legally, this proves nothing. Edited security footage without chain of custody documentation won't survive a motion to suppress. It proves they're hiding something, I said. Lydia's expression didn't change. It proves someone deleted 5 seconds from a 4-year-old video file. That's not the same thing. She pulled out a leather folio, extracted a single document. What you should be worried about is this. The document header read, Whitfield Family Trust, Interim Management Protocol. They can't declare him dead, Lydia said, her finger tracing the relevant clause. Legally impossible without remains or 7 years elapsed. But they don't need to. Interim control is cleaner. My forensic mind caught up to her meaning. The trust. If they re-sign it while he's missing, I'm no longer named. December 15th. Lydia tapped the date printed in the footer. After that date, you have 0 legal claim to contest asset distribution. You'll be a stranger to your own marriage. No standing to demand records, no right to investigate, no access to accounts. Legally speaking, Alaric's financial life will exist in a space where you never existed. The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright. The smell of coffee and grease pressed against my lungs. How long do I have? I asked. Today is October 11th. Lydia pulled out a pocket calendar circled December 15th in red ink. 65 days. 65 days. That's all the time between now and becoming legally invisible. What do I need to do? My voice came out steadier than I felt. Prove he's alive, Lydia said simply. Or prove they're actively hiding him. Either way, you need evidence substantial enough to trigger a criminal investigation before that trust re-signs. Because once it does, you lose the legal standing to gather any evidence at all. She slid the calendar across the table. The red circle seemed to pulse. 65 days to find a missing husband, decode edited footage, and stop a legal mechanism that's already in motion. Lydia's expression finally showed something, sympathy maybe, or recognition of impossible odds. If you're going to fight this, you need to move fast. And you need to be absolutely certain you're ready for what you'll find. My coffee had gone cold. The calendar sat between us like a ticking bomb. December 15th, 2025. After that date, I wouldn't just lose access to investigate, I'd lose the legal right to claim Alaric ever belonged to me at all. But before I could stop a trust signing, I needed to know what those missing 5 seconds contained, and why someone was willing to destroy evidence to hide them. Because people didn't delete footage unless what it showed was worse than the crime of deletion itself. The 65-day countdown started the moment we left Rosewood Diner. By the next afternoon, October 12th, at 3 p.m., Benedict had spread the evidence across the safehouse desk like an autopsy report. The folder hit the surface with the finality of a coffin closing, and I knew before opening it that whatever was inside would either confirm my husband's betrayal or prove the in-laws were even more calculating than I'd imagined. "I'm sorry," Benedict said, watching my face. "I thought you should see what they've been circulating to the board." The first document was a text log. Alaric's phone number at the top. An unknown contact labeled only as AG. Messages spanning 3 years. "Missing you. When can we meet?" "Next week. The usual place. I love you." My hands went numb. I flipped to the next page. Hotel itineraries from business trips to Seattle, Boston, Miami. Always the same pattern, 1 room, 2 occupants charged to an account I'd never seen on our joint statements. Then the bank records, an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, Alaric's name, monthly transfers totaling $47,000 over 2 years, all funding luxury purchases, jewelry, designer clothes, a lease payment for a downtown apartment in Charleston I'd never known existed, hotel receipts, text logs, 4 years of an affair I never... My voice cracked. Wait. I pulled the bank authorization closer. The signature line. Alaric's name in his distinctive handwriting, the way the W in Whitfield always swooped upward with pressure at the ascender. Except it didn't. I pulled out my phone, found a photo from our wedding certificate, compared the signatures side by side. This signature, I said, my forensic training overriding the emotional devastation trying to drown me. The W ascender Alaric always pressed harder here. You can see the ink pool slightly. This one is too uniform, too perfect. Benedict leaned closer. "You're saying it's forged. I'm saying it's traced, not written." I ran my finger along the authorization form, feeling for pressure indentations even through the photocopy. Someone had access to his genuine signature, probably from corporate documents, and copied it, but they didn't account for the biomechanics of how he actually signed, the muscle memory, the pressure variance. How do you mourn a betrayal that your own training tells you is manufactured evidence? I sat back the hotel receipts and text logs, suddenly looking less like infidelity and more like industrial-scale fraud. Someone with resources had built an entire false narrative, complete with financial trails and digital communications. "Who has this kind of access?" I asked. "To forge documents, create bank accounts, generate text logs that look legitimate." "Someone with money," Benedict said quietly. "And someone with enough legal cover to know it wouldn't be challenged, not if you were already legally erased before you could contest it." The December 15th deadline suddenly made terrible sense. They weren't just removing my legal standing to investigate, they were removing my ability to challenge evidence they'd spent years manufacturing. "I need to see Anouk," I said. "If she's the AG in those text logs, she's either part of this or she's another victim." Benedict's expression went carefully neutral. "I can arrange an accidental encounter. But if they're monitoring her, and they probably are, you'll need to be careful about what you say." The Carrington Hotel lobby smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. October 13th, 11 a.m. Benedict had tracked Anouk to a clean energy conference where she was listed as a project partner for some offshore development corporation. She wore tailored navy, her hair pulled back to emphasize the necklace, Alaric's necklace, gleaming against her collarbone. I approached slowly, trying to look casual, trying not to look like a woman hunting for answers that might destroy her. Anouk saw me coming. Her expression shifted, something calculated crossing her features. "You're still clinging to him." Her voice carried across the marble floor, loud enough for the concierge to hear. Performative disdain. How dedicated. Some women know when to let go. She moved closer, adjusting her conference badge. Up close, I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers trembled slightly before she steadied them. "In this place?" she whispered, her voice dropping so low I had to lean in. Even the walls have ears. Do you understand me? Her hand touched the necklace, deliberate, a signal. Where did you get? I started to ask. Her eyes flashed warning. She stepped back, voice returning to its public register. I have a conference to attend. Some of us have actual careers to maintain. She turned sharply, heels clicking across marble, then over her shoulder, barely audible, check the ventilation grills. She disappeared through the revolving doors before I could respond. I stood frozen in the lobby, my forensic brain processing what had just happened, the performative cruelty, the whispered warning, the deliberate necklace touch, the ventilation grills. Fear has a specific texture when you realize every room you've entered for the past week might be broadcasting your words to the people who want you erased. I looked up slowly. The hotel lobby had 6 ventilation grills visible from where I stood. Standard HVAC, except one of them had a lens. Tiny. Professional. The kind of surveillance equipment that costs 6 figures and requires expertise to install. Benedict was waiting by the elevator bank. I walked toward him carefully, keeping my expression neutral, my lips barely moving. We need to leave, I said quietly, and we need to assume everywhere we've been is compromised. His eyes flickered to the ventilation grill I'd spotted. He didn't react, just nodded once and guided me toward the exit. We didn't speak until we were 3 blocks away, standing in the noise and chaos of a construction site where conversations would be impossible to isolate on any recording device. How long? I asked. If they have hotel lobbies covered. Benedict's expression was grim. Probably since before you were expelled. Maybe since Alaric disappeared. This isn't improvised surveillance, this is infrastructure. I thought about the safe house, the penthouse with its multi-layered security, the locations we'd chosen thinking we were being careful. Even the walls have ears, I repeated. She wasn't being poetic, she was being literal. A nuke had been trying to warn me, encoded in performative cruelty, and whispered fragments because she knew someone was listening. Someone who controlled surveillance comprehensive enough to cover public hotel lobbies and private conversations. Which meant whoever was monitoring knew where Alaric was, and knew I was getting too close to finding him. But first I needed to understand exactly what I was holding that made me dangerous enough to wiretap, forge evidence against, and legally erase. Because people didn't build surveillance infrastructure this comprehensive unless the stakes were catastrophic. And whatever Alaric had known, whatever had made him say, if I disappear 4 years ago, was worth killing to protect. The surveillance discovery changed everything. By October 14th, we'd moved document review to Copyworks' print shop, tucked between a laundromat and pawn shop, where fluorescent lights buzzed and the air smelled like toner. My own signature stared back at me from the photocopied document. And the worst part wasn't that I couldn't remember signing it, it was that I recognized the pen, the date, the notary stamp, and knew with absolute certainty that what came after my name had been added later. Benedict spread pages across the scratched work table. This POA, you signed it October 2020. Do you remember what it authorized? I pulled the document closer. Forensic training engaging like muscle memory. October 17th, 2020. Alaric had been preparing for Singapore a 3-week trip requiring spousal authorization for emergency medical and financial decisions. Routine medical proxy, basic financial decisions during business travel, I said, scanning the first page. My signature was genuine, the characteristic looped H, the slight tremor in the W from signing quickly. Standard. Except. I stopped, felt the paper. Page 3. The paper stock on page 3 doesn't match, I said, holding it to fluorescent light. Pages 1 and 2 had the slight texture of 24-pound cotton bond. Page 3 was smoother. Commercial grade. Probably 20-pound laser printer stock. Benedict leaned in. Different paper. Different paper. Different manufacturer. I aligned the pages carefully. Look, the staple holes. Pages 1 and 2 were stapled together originally. See the rust oxidation creating perfect circles. But page 3, the holes are offset, 0.3 millimeters. Someone removed the original staple, inserted a new page, re-stapled through slightly different positions. My hands shook, not from fear, from fury. They didn't need to forge my signature, I said, voice colder than I'd ever heard it. They just needed to swap what I'd authorized after I'd already signed it. Benedict pulled out a jeweler's loop, the kind forensic document examiners use. He handed it to me. I examined my signature under magnification. The ink had characteristic 5-year oxidation, slight fading, microscopic cracking, and thicker strokes. Then I moved to page three's text. The addendum was laser printed, but under angled light I could see what the naked eye would miss. No oxidation. The toner sat on top like it had been applied yesterday. The text on page 3 is recent, I said, within the last year. But my signature on page 1 is genuinely 5 years old. Someone kept the original authorization and waited until they needed it. They didn't need a weapon. They needed a Xerox machine and access to a notary seal. I spread all 3 pages side by side. Page 1. My genuine signature authorizing routine spousal proxy for medical and basic financial decisions during international business travel, not to exceed 30 days. Page 2, standard notarization language. Page 3, an addendum granting full authorization for equity share transfer, offshore account access, and irrevocable trust modification without additional spousal consent in perpetuity. In perpetuity, forever. How much? I asked quietly. How much equity does this give them control over? Benedict had done the math. $28 million. Your equity layer from the marriage merger, technically yours, but authorized for management by whoever holds this document. $28 million. That's what made me dangerous enough to monitor, forge evidence against, and legally erase. Not because I knew where Alaric was, but because I owned equity large enough to block their plans. When did they substitute the pages? Benedict asked. I examined staple holes again under the loupe. Rust oxidation takes time. The original staple was in place for years, deep orange circles on pages 1 and 2. Page 3 has minimal oxidation. I'd say substitution happened within 18 months, probably after they decided to remove Alaric. The timeline crystallized. They'd kept my authorization on file for years, a loaded gun waiting to be fired. When Alaric disappeared, they'd waited, watched. Then, probably last year, they'd pulled out my old signature and attached new authorization. Murder by signature, cleaner than poison, more permanent than a bullet, and completely legal if no one ever checked the staple holes. Can we prove this in court? I asked. Benedict's expression was grim. With the right forensic examiner. Absolutely. Paper stock analysis, ink oxidation, dating, staple hole alignment. It's physical evidence. But we need the original document from the attorney's vault. This photocopy proves fraud to us, but a judge needs actual pages. Which means we need to get into Oscar Hampton's office. Which means you need legal standing to demand discovery. Benedict tapped the document. And this is why December 15th matters. Once the trust re-signs, you lose standing to challenge any of this. The POA becomes accepted fact. Your equity becomes their equity. You become legally invisible. I held the doctored power of attorney against fluorescent light misaligned staple holes, casting tiny shadows like evidence of surgical incision. They didn't need a weapon to destroy me. They just needed a signature. And if this document could be altered after the fact, pages swapped, authorization, expanded control, transferred what else had been retroactively edited to erase my legal existence. More urgently, if they'd gone to this much trouble to control my equity position 5 years ago, that meant Alaric had known, had seen it coming, which meant he'd been preparing his own countermeasures. I just needed to find them before December 15th turned me into a ghost. We need to get back into that estate, I said quietly. Not as the expelled daughter-in-law, as someone with legitimate legal standing they can't refuse. Benedict nodded slowly. I might have an idea about that, but you're not going to like it. I looked at the forged document at my genuine signature attached to authorization I'd never given, and felt something cold and determined settle in my chest. Try me, I said. Benedict's idea was elegant and dangerous, weaponize the legal system back. 6 days after discovering the forged power of attorney, on October 20th at 9 a.m. I sat in Lydia Brennan's office preparing to sign documents that would give me what force couldn't legal access to the estate. The irony wasn't lost on me as I signed my name to the elder care custody documents. After discovering how easily signatures could be weaponized, I was using the same system to walk back into the house that had expelled me. Under North Carolina statute, Lydia said, sliding the custody petition across her desk, you have standing as Alaric's spouse. They can't block this without appearing negligent. Morris Whitfield, 88. declining rapidly. Alaric's grandfather, who'd built the family fortune and was now showing signs of cognitive decline that medical records didn't fully explain. You understand what you're walking into, Benedict said quietly. They threw you out once. This time they'll be watching every move. I signed with careful precision, photographing every page. That's fine, I said. I'll be watching them too. Lydia filed the petition at 9:47 a.m. They had 72 hours to respond. By October 23rd, I'd have court-ordered access, or they'd have to publicly contest why a wife shouldn't care for her husband's dying grandfather. They chose access. Fighting it would have drawn scrutiny they'd spent 5 years avoiding. On October 21st at 2:30 p.m., I walked back through the iron gates. This time the guard checked my identification against a court order. This time I had legal standing. Stepping back into that estate felt like a forensic accountant willingly entering a rigged ledger, every line item designed to erase her. The sunroom smelled like lavender and decay. Morris Whitfield sat in a wheelchair by the window 88 and drifting further each week into the fog his family was feeding him. Are you the nurse? His eyes struggled to focus. Where's my grandson? I'm Honora, I said, gently kneeling beside his wheelchair. Alaric's wife. I'm here to help take care of you. Alaric. The name caught in his memory. He was going to Singapore. Did he come back? 4 years gone, and in Morris's mind, Alaric had left last month. The daily care log sat on the side table, spiral-bound 6 months of entries. Each page noted the same thing at 3 p.m., herbal tea administered, patient calm, afternoon rest. 6 months of identical notes. But the handwriting never changed. Different rotating aides listed Susan, Patricia, Robert, but every entry showed identical handwriting. Same pressure, same loops, same distinctive crossed T and T. Someone was falsifying the records. I photographed every page, timestamps visible. Then I sat with Morris, talking quietly, watching October sunlight paint shadows across his hands. At 2:55 p.m., Rufus appeared in the doorway. Time for his tea, he said, cold authority in his voice. He gets agitated without it. He carried a porcelain teapot and cup, steam rising. The smell was herbal chamomile with something sharper underneath, something medicinal. Rufus poured with measured precision, not casual tea-making, careful formula following, exactly 3/4 full. I'll make sure he drinks it all, I said, taking the cup. The log says it helps him sleep. Rufus's expression flickered surprise that I'd read the log or concern that I'd noticed the pattern. It does, he said. Make sure he finishes it. All of it. He needs consistency. He left. I waited until his footsteps faded. Then I photographed everything. The tea, the cup, the pot residue. I poured half into a cosmetic container I'd brought for this purpose, sealed it, marked time and date. I held the cup to Morris's lips, tilting it so he thought he was drinking, but most stayed in the cup. There you go, I said softly. Just a little more. By 3:30 p.m., Morris's eyes were clearing. Just slightly, just enough. Honora, he said, you married my grandson, the accountant girl. Past tense awareness, present tense recognition. 3 o'clock tea administered daily with pharmaceutical precision, not mercy, but murder on a schedule. I stayed until 5 p.m. documenting every moment of increasing lucidity. By the time Rufus returned, Morris was asking coherent questions about estate finances. Rufus's face went carefully blank. He's having a good day, I said steadily. The tea must be working. Yes, Rufus said slowly, it must be. But I saw the calculation in his eyes. The same cold assessment I'd seen when Myrtle expelled me. That night at the safe house, I lined up my evidence photographs of falsified logs, T-sample videos of Morris's progression from confused to lucid over 2 hours. They were poisoning an 88-year-old man into cognitive collapse. Slowly, systematically, making it look like natural decline. All so he'd be incompetent enough to sign whatever they put in front of him on December 15th, or incompetent enough that a judge would grant them full conservatorship. I watched Rufus measure that tea with the precision of someone following a chemical formula, not a recipe. The daily care log showed identical handwriting across supposedly different aides. Someone was falsifying records to hide systematic poisoning. If they were willing to drug Morris into cognitive collapse to secure a signature, what would they do to the daughter-in-law who'd just documented the evidence? The deadline was 56 days away, less time than it might take to prosecute elder abuse, but exactly enough time for Morris to deteriorate past legal competence. Unless I could prove what was in that tea. and prove it fast enough to stop whatever they had planned. Because I was holding evidence of felony elder abuse. And people who poisoned family members didn't stop at tea when the stakes included $28 million and a missing husband who knew too much. The question wasn't whether they'd escalate, it was when, and whether I'd see it coming before it was too late. For 3 days, I played the dutiful caregiver, monitored Morris's medication, documented his lucidity patterns, smiled politely at Myrtle when she commented on how committed I was to family duty, all while collecting evidence of systematic poisoning and waiting for the right moment to search. That moment came October 24th at 2:45 p.m., when Rufus drove Myrtle to a charity board meeting and Morris fell into his post-lunch nap. The wedding portrait had hung in our bedroom for 4 years before Alaric disappeared, and I'd dusted the frame 1,000 times without realizing it wasn't just decorative. The ornate corner scrollwork was a custom lock mechanism that opened with exactly the right pressure. My old bedroom was boarded over now, converted to storage after the expulsion. But the elder care custody order gave me access to the entire estate, and 20 minutes with a crowbar opened the door. The portrait was right where I'd left it, mounted high on the wall. Too high for routine cleaning, which now seemed deliberately strategic. I pulled it down carefully, felt along the gilded frame until my fingers found the slight give in the upper left corner. Press, twist, click. The back panel released. Inside, a small velvet pouch containing a watch. Not just any watch, the Patek Philippe I'd given Alaric for our first anniversary. Engraved on the back, AW to HW, our time together. The crystal was deliberately cracked, the mechanism frozen at exactly 11:47. I turned it over in my hands, feeling its weight. Something rattled inside. I found the release mechanism on the back, the kind that opens the case for battery replacement, and pried it open. A small brass key fell into my palm, safe deposit box size, and beneath it rolled impossibly tight a strip of microfilm. I held it to the afternoon light filtering through boarded windows. Handwritten in Alaric's precise architectural lettering, First Southern Bank, Charlotte, Box 447, requires court order or my death certificate plus this key. Everything you need is inside. Trust no one except Benedict. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you why. Box 447. The watch stopped at 11:47. You knew they'd try to declare you dead, I whispered to the empty room. You knew, and you left me a way to fight back. I traced the inscription again. Our time together. The watch wasn't just stopped, it was a message. The box number, the time. Everything coded into a gift I'd given him, transformed into the key to whatever evidence he'd been gathering. A dead man's love letter written in safe deposit keys, and stopped watches more reliable than any words he could have said. I photographed everything: the frame mechanism, the watch, the microfilm instructions. Then I reassembled the portrait carefully, leaving no evidence I'd been there. The key went into my bra, the only place I could be certain it wouldn't be found in a casual search. I made it back to Morris's room by 3:15 p.m., 15 minutes before Rufus typically returned with the afternoon tea. That night, at 10:20 p.m., I was returning from checking on Morris when a nuke materialized in the second-floor corridor. Dim light, no witnesses. She moved like someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. She didn't speak, just pointed. They're barely visible in the outlet cover, a lens the size of a pinhead. Picture frame on the wall, another one tucked into the decorative corner. Crown molding where it met the ceiling, a third device so small I'd have missed it if she hadn't traced the exact position with her finger. There. Picture frame. Crown molding. Anouk whispered, her voice so low I had to read her lips as much as hear her. They've wired the entire house. My blood went cold. At the gala, when I said marry me, that was code. Her eyes locked on mine with desperate intensity. Monitored area, they record everything. The necklace, the cruel performance, the whispered warnings, all of it suddenly made terrible sense. How long? I asked, matching her whisper. Years, since before Alaric disappeared. Oscar Hampton's security company installed them under the guise of estate protection. Anouk glanced down the hallway, checking for movement. Audio only mostly, but high grade. They can isolate individual voices from 30 feet away. I thought about every word I'd spoken in this house for 3 days. Every moment I'd thought I was alone with Morris. Every conversation with Benedict about the POA fraud and the poisoning evidence. Every word she'd spoken in this house for 3 days had been recorded, catalogued, weaponized. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Anouk's expression flickered with something that might have been fear or might have been calculation. Because if you lose your temper here, if you confront them about Morris, about the trust, about anything, they'll use the audio to prove you're mentally unstable. Custody proceedings, competency hearings, you'll lose everything. They're building a case. They've been building it since the day you married him. Anouk pulled back slightly. Every grief-stricken word about Alaric, every argument about Morris's care, they're editing it into a narrative. The unhinged wife, the unstable mother, unfit for custody, unfit for property rights, unfit for legal standing. The December 15th deadline suddenly made even more terrible sense. They didn't just want to strip my equity shares through the trust re-signing. They wanted to declare me legally incompetent to challenge any of it. How do you know all this? I asked. Anouk's jaw tightened. Because I helped install some of them, before I understood what they were really for. Footsteps echoed from the floor below. She stepped back immediately, her face transforming into the cold mask I'd seen at the hotel lobby. Remember? She said, voice returning to normal volume, calculated and cruel. Visitors should respect quiet hours. Morris needs his rest. She walked away, heels clicking on hardwood, leaving me standing in the bugged hallway with the cold metal key pressed against my ribs. They didn't just want my equity shares. They wanted me declared incompetent. Every word I'd spoken, every emotional reaction, all of it compiled into ammunition for a competency hearing that would erase me more permanently than any forged signature. But Alaric had left me the key to box 447, and the instructions said it required either a court order or his death certificate, which meant whatever was inside was evidence they couldn't access, not without admitting he was dead, or giving me legal standing to challenge them. I had Lydia Brennan, who specialized in hostile legal warfare. I had Benedict, who'd been monitoring their communications for 4 years. I had Morris's T-sample and falsified care logs. And now I had something they didn't know existed, a safe deposit box full of whatever evidence Alaric had gathered before they made him disappear. The question was whether I could stay silent long enough to weaponize it before they declared me too unstable to matter. For 4 days I played the silent caregiver while Lydia Brennan worked legal channels to turn Alaric's hidden key into admissible evidence. On October 28th at 10 a.m., her work paid off. The federal subpoena hit the courthouse table with the weight of legitimate authority, and for the first time since finding Alaric's hidden key, I felt something other than paranoia. I felt the cold satisfaction of bureaucracy working in my favor. Judge Hargrove signed this morning, said the woman across from me, sliding the document forward. Corinne Weaver, 43, and carrying the weight of a suspension she'd earned 3 years prior. You have a limited window to execute before the judge reviews the warrant. We need to act fast. Lydia sat beside me reviewing the order. Economic Crimes Investigation Framework bypasses the death certificate requirement entirely. I studied the subpoena. This bypasses the death certificate requirement. How? Active financial crimes investigation, Corinne said, her voice measured. But understand, if you misstep by a single millimeter on chain of custody, every piece of evidence inside that box becomes inadmissible. The Whitfields have resources to challenge every technicality. What kind of resources? I asked. The kind that got me suspended 3 years ago when I tried to investigate their offshore structures. The kind that require a joint task force and congressional oversight to prosecute. Corinne pulled out a second document. Chain of custody protocol. Every item gets photographed, logged, witnessed by 2 unrelated parties, and sealed in evidence bags. No shortcuts. A subpoena is just paperwork with teeth, but teeth sharp enough to bite through 4 years of lies if wielded correctly. 72 hours, I said, calculating. Until October 31st at 10 a.m. Correct. Corinne's expression was serious. Whatever's in that box, Alaric went to considerable trouble to hide it. Be prepared for evidence that destroys them, or evidence that destroys you. I thought about the watch stopped at 11:47, the microfilm instructions, years of planning. He wouldn't have left me a trap, I said. Corinne's expression suggested she'd seen that proven wrong before. People do surprising things when they're desperate. 2 days later, on October 30th at 3:15 p.m., I was at the post office records office in Charlotte, tracing the origin of the infidelity photographs Benedict had first shown me. The clerk pulled the archived envelope from storage original packaging preserved per federal mail fraud protocols. I photographed it from every angle. The postmark stamp was clear October 14th, 2021. October 2021, 6 months before Alaric vanished. This was staged before the kidnapping, I said quietly, documenting every detail. The return address was a Shell LLC. Cross-referencing corporate records took 17 minutes and revealed what I'd suspected registered agent at Rufus Whitfield's business office address, filed 3 weeks before the photos were mailed. They'd photographed a fake affair, created a shell company, mailed the evidence to themselves, and held it for years waiting for the right moment to weaponize it. They wanted me to walk away voluntarily, I said, sealing the envelope in an evidence bag. Sign away my own protection while thinking I was escaping betrayal. October 2021 proof they'd been planning her erasure longer than they'd been planning Alaric's disappearance. The timeline crystallized. October 2020. Power of attorney altered. October 2021. Fake infidelity evidence staged and archived. April 2022, Alaric disappeared. October 2025, I discovered the key. Every move anticipated, every trap laid years in advance. The forged POA controlling my equity, the fake affair forcing divorce, the surveillance documenting my instability, the poisoning of Morris securing his incompetent signature. 5 years of meticulous planning. But if Rufus and Myrtle had been orchestrating this for half a decade, that meant someone had been planning countermeasures just as long. I thought about the wedding portrait frame's custom lock, the deliberately broken watch, the safe deposit key, the microfilm instructions in Alaric's handwriting. Trust no one except Benedict, everything you need is inside. Whatever was in First Southern Bank Box 447 was Alaric's final play, the evidence he'd been gathering while they gathered theirs, the countermeasure he'd built while they built their trap. I had 72 hours to open it before the subpoena expired and they could block it. 72 hours to find out if my husband had left me tools to destroy his family, or if Corinne was right and I was walking into evidence that would destroy me. I sealed the last photograph, double-checked the chain of custody log, and walked out into autumn sunlight that felt colder than it should. The clock was ticking. Whatever was waiting in that vault would either vindicate 4 years of investigation or prove I'd been fighting the wrong war. I'd spent 4 years as a ghost in my own marriage. 4 years wondering if my husband had abandoned us or been taken. 4 years watching my daughter grow up asking questions I couldn't answer. If Box 447 contained evidence that destroyed me, at least I'd finally know the truth. And if it contained evidence that destroyed them, I'd make sure every forged signature, every staged photograph, every poisoned cup of tea was documented in federal court with chain of custody precision that made appeals impossible. 72 hours, 48 left now. Time to find out what my husband had been hiding. The 48-hour countdown meant working multiple fronts simultaneously. While Lydia prepared vault access protocols, Benedict and I had one piece of unfinished business, recovering the evidence that started everything. On November 2nd at 4:30 p.m., we stood in a climate-controlled server room at Secure Vault Data Archiving in Charlotte. Benedict's contact, a systems analyst who'd worked the Whitfield account before being mysteriously reassigned, pulled up the estate security backup from off-site cloud storage that the in-laws' IT administrator couldn't delete. The recovered footage played in real time, no edits, no cuts, and in the 5 seconds that had been surgically removed from every other copy, I watched my father-in-law's hand move with practiced precision to slip something into Alaric's water glass while his back was turned. Frame by frame, the evidence unfolded. March 14th, 2021, 11:34, 17 p.m. Alaric stood at the file cabinet, his back to the room, pulling documents. Rufus approached from behind, glanced toward the door to confirm privacy, and reached into his jacket pocket. A small glass vial, clear liquid, maybe 2 ounces. Rufus uncapped it with one hand while keeping his eyes on Alaric's back. Poured the contents into the water glass sitting on the desk. Recapped the vial. Returned it to his pocket. Total elapsed time 4.3 seconds. At 11:34:22 p.m., the timestamp jumped the gap where someone had cut the footage. When it resumed, Alaric was turning back from the file cabinet, reaching for his water glass. Benedict paused the playback on frame 47. Rufus's hand frozen in the act vial, visible water glass beneath it. There, frame 47. That's premeditated sedation, Benedict said quietly. I couldn't speak, couldn't process what I was seeing. He drugged his own son, I finally said, my voice hollow, before accusing him of betraying the family. Benedict let the footage continue. 30 seconds later, Alaric drank from the glass. 2 minutes after that, his speech started slurring. By the time the argument escalated, the part we'd seen in the edited version, Alaric was confused, defensive, unable to articulate coherent responses. The argument was staged, Benedict said. Alaric wasn't refusing to cooperate, he was chemically unable to defend himself. Frame 47, a father drugging his son with the calm of someone who'd done it before. I thought about Morris's afternoon tea, the measured precision, the identical handwriting and falsified care logs. This wasn't opportunistic poisoning, this was a family tradition. Can we use this in court? I asked. Benedict's contact pulled up the metadata log. Off-site backup was never deleted because it was never flagged for deletion. Whoever scrubbed the estate servers didn't know about the redundant cloud storage. Chain of custody is clean. It's been sitting in encrypted storage for 4 years, unedited, with documented access logs, showing no one touched it until today. We need 3 copies, I said. 1 for Lydia, 1 for Corinne's task force, 1 for me. Already rendering, the analyst said. We left Secure Vault with 3 encrypted drives, each containing frame 47, and the 4.3 seconds that proved Rufus Whitfield had drugged his own son before staging a confrontation designed to justify whatever came next. 3 days later, on November 5th, at 2:45 p.m., I was in Morris's room at the estate, helping him through his afternoon routine while carefully skipping the 3 p.m. tea. He'd been lucid for almost an hour, asking about property taxes, questioning why his attorney hadn't called back, wondering where his grandson had gone. Then I heard voices from the adjacent medical suite. The wall between rooms was thin, probably deliberately so given the surveillance network. Myrtle's voice sharp and businesslike. The notary confirmed, December 15th, 10 a.m., everything transfers that morning. Rufus lower, but audible. Morris will be manageable by then. Just keep the tea protocol consistent. And the daughter-in-law, Myrtle's voice carried cold calculation. She's been documenting his care. Those photographs. The audio recordings will handle her, Rufus said. Oscar's compiling the file now. 16 instances of emotional instability, 9 confrontational episodes, 3 threats against family members. Any judge will see she's unfit for custody or property decisions. I stood frozen beside Morris's wheelchair, my phone recording every word through the wall. December 15th, 40 days from now. Morris looked up at me with clearer eyes than he'd had in weeks. Is someone talking about signing papers? He asked. They keep bringing me papers, but I can't remember if I signed them already. You haven't signed anything important, I said quietly, helping him to his afternoon nap position. And you won't, not until you're well enough to understand exactly what you're signing. But through the wall, Myrtle and Rufus were already scheduling the notary, already planning the medical guidance that would make an 88-year-old man sign away control while too drugged to comprehend what he was agreeing to. 40 days, a biblical flood's worth of time to either build an ark or drown. I did the math automatically. My forensic training calculating timelines. November 5th to December 15th was exactly 40 days. 40 days to gather admissible evidence. 40 days to open the vault and decode whatever Alaric had left inside. 40 days to legally halt a trust signing they'd been engineering for half a decade. 40 days before they drugged an 88-year-old man into signing away everything, used my recorded grief as proof I was too unstable to contest it, and legally erased my existence so thoroughly that even Zyla would become a ward of the same family that had poisoned her great-grandfather and kidnapped her father. I stood motionless in Morris's room, listening to them finalize logistics through the thin wall. The notary, the estate attorney, the transfer documents that would dissolve my equity claims and make me a legal ghost. But I had something they didn't know about. A federal subpoena that expired in 24 hours. A safe deposit box that might contain Alaric's countermeasures to this entire conspiracy. Frame 47 showing Rufus drugging his own son. Morris's tea sample proving systematic poisoning. The postmarked October 2021 envelope proving years of premeditation, and 40 days to weaponize all of it before they executed the final phase of a plan they'd been building since before I'd even known I was a target. The question was whether 40 days was enough time to build a legal case that could survive their resources, their lawyers, their audio recordings of my instability, and their willingness to drug anyone who stood in their way, or whether I was counting down to my own legal execution. The 40-day countdown meant maintaining perfect normalcy while evidence compiled and the federal subpoena clock ticked toward expiration. On November 6th at 5:15 p.m., I was pumping gas at a Charlotte outskirts station, watching light drizzle pattern the windshield when I recognized the man in the unmarked sedan 2 pumps over. The same man from the train station the night Benedict rescued us, watching with the stillness of someone trained to wait. He climbed out, 53, carrying the quiet authority of 2 decades in Treasury enforcement. He walked toward me, deliberately, hands visible. "The train station," he said quietly. "3 weeks ago. I was there when your brother-in-law picked you up." My hand tightened on the gas nozzle. "Who are you? Why were you there?" "Clifford Dalton. Someone who's been watching to make sure you and your daughter stay safe." "Watching? For how long?" "Since the night they threw you out. Since you stood in that rain with nowhere to go." I studied him, the unmarked sedan, the deliberate posture, the positioning between me and the station entrance. "You're not a cop," I said. "Treasury enforcement retired. But I still have friends who care when certain families start moving money in patterns that look like laundering and kidnapping." He glanced toward the station. "Your daughter's in the restroom." The fact that he knew should have terrified me. Instead, I felt relief. Someone had been watching. Someone had cared. "Why tell me this now?" I asked. "Because tomorrow, you're opening a safe deposit box that dangerous people would prefer stayed closed, and because you need to understand something before you walk back into that estate." He pulled a small device from his pocket key fob with LED display. He pressed a button and it lit red. "Active transmitter detected," he said. "Probably in your purse or coat. They've been tracking your movements since you filed the eldercare custody petition." My blood went cold. "Never trust a single word spoken inside that estate," Clifford said. "Every syllable is recorded. Every emotional reaction documented. They're building a case to prove you're mentally unfit. The audio they're collecting isn't surveillance, it's ammunition." How many people had been circling her life in protective silence while she thought she was utterly alone? "Can the recordings be used in court?" I asked. "Depends on the judge, but contested or not, they'll leak them to destroy your credibility before trial." He glanced at his device. "Find the tracker and leave it somewhere public, grocery store, mall. Make them waste resources following a ghost." The gas pump clicked off. I replaced the nozzle, calculating implications. "Why help me?" I asked. "Because Alaric Whitfield contacted me 4 years ago asking about offshore asset tracking and evidence preservation. He knew something was coming. He was trying to protect you before they could move." Before I could respond, Zyla emerged from the convenience store clutching her worn plush bear. She saw me and started over, her 6-year-old face showing the wariness that had become permanent. Clifford's gaze shifted to her and something changed. Not casual acknowledgement. This was focused. The way his eyes lingered on the bear, the way his jaw tightened with satisfaction rather than concern. He knew something about that toy, something specific. The way he looked at her daughter, not with a stranger's passing interest, but with a guardian's calculus of threat assessment, made her understand she'd been watched over far longer than she'd known to be afraid. "Mrs. Whitfield," Clifford said quietly, eyes still on Zyla. "Your husband was smarter than they gave him credit for. Whatever you find in that vault tomorrow, trust it. He spent years preparing for exactly this." Zyla reached me, pressing against my side. "Who's that man?" she whispered. "Someone who's been making sure we're safe," I said. Clifford nodded once, then walked back toward his sedan. But before climbing in, his gaze returned one final time to the worn plush bear in Zyla's arms. And something in that look, the way his expression settled into grim satisfaction, the way he seemed to be confirming something, rather than noticing it, told me that whatever protection he'd been providing wasn't improvised or recent. He'd been part of this longer than the expulsion, longer than the surveillance discovery, maybe as long as Alaric had been planning his countermeasures. The bear. He was looking at the bear with recognition, with approval. as if he knew exactly why that particular toy mattered. As if he'd been part of putting something there I hadn't discovered yet. Clifford started his engine and pulled away into the drizzle, leaving me standing with Zyla clutching a bear that suddenly felt heavier than worn fabric. I thought about Alaric's hidden key, the wedding portrait frame, the deliberate breadcrumbs. What else had he hidden in plain sight? What else had been protecting us that I'd dismissed as ordinary? I helped Zyla into the car and checked my watch. 5:47 p.m. Tomorrow morning, at 10 a.m., the federal subpoena would reach its 72-hour expiration. I had exactly 16 hours and 13 minutes remaining to open First Southern Bank Box 447. And whatever was inside that vault, Clifford Dalton had just confirmed it was important enough that people were tracking my movements to stop me from reaching it, which meant tomorrow morning when I walked into that bank with Lydia and Corinne and Benedict. I needed to be prepared for the possibility that the Whitfield family would make one final move to stop me. 40 days to build a case, 16 hours until I could access the ammunition to build it. The countdown was accelerating, and I had the unsettling certainty that whatever Alaric had hidden in box 447 was going to change everything. 9 days of coordinating witness protocols and maintaining silent caregiver routine. By November 15th, at 10:15 a.m., everything was in place. The vault door at First Southern Bank swung open with mechanical precision, and I realized that after 9 days of legal maneuvering, 4 years of searching, and a lifetime of being told I was powerless, I was about to hold whatever Alaric had risked everything to preserve. Thomas Radcliffe, the bank manager who'd witnessed 100 vault openings without drama, approached this one with the formality of someone who recognized a federal subpoena meant serious business. Behind him, Corinne with her evidence camera, Lydia with documentation, Benedict with chain of custody logs. Box 447, Thomas said formally. Open November 15th, 2025, at 10:17 a.m. under federal subpoena 2025-EC-8834. Contents to be logged. I pulled Alaric's key from the sealed envelope. The brass felt warm, or maybe that was just my hands shaking. The key turned, clicked. The steel box was smaller than I'd imagined. Maybe 10 by 14 inches, 3 inches deep. Heavy. I set it on the witness table. Corinne positioned her camera. Lydia readied her pen. I opened the lid. No cash, no gold, no escape passports. A vacuum-sealed USB drive. A forensic DNA collection kit in factory packaging. Sterile swabs, evidence seals, a document folder sealed with evidence tape. USB drive vacuum sealed, Corinne said, photographing methodically. DNA kit unopened. Document folder. No currency, no negotiables. I looked at Benedict. He didn't leave me escape money, he left me ammunition. No cash, no gold, just evidence, and evidence meant he'd planned for prosecution, not escape. Thomas logged each item. USB drive serial number visible. GeneTech DNA kit lot number recorded. Legal folder seal intact. All items released to custody of Corinne Weaver, Federal Task Force designee, Thomas said. Chain of custody receipt requires all witness signatures. We signed. 4 signatures confirming November 15th, 2025, 10:27 a.m. 30 minutes later, we were in Benedict's vehicle in the parking structure, secured, swept for bugs, windows tinted. Lydia carefully broke the evidence seal on the folder. The first page was Alaric's handwriting, for Honora. Open before viewing USB contents. Legal standing requires this first. Lydia turned the page. Her expression went carefully blank. November 2020, she said slowly. Irrevocable equity assignment. He transferred holdings directly to you, took his name off entirely. I leaned forward. Legal language dense and precise, but certain phrases jumped out. Irrevocable assignment of equity interest. Transfer Alaric J. Whitfield. Transferee Honora M. Whitfield. Total value $28 million. Asset description. Primary equity layers in Whitfield. Clean Energy Holdings, Whitfield Family Trust, shares in associated offshore structures. Effective date November 17, 2020. 5 years ago, I said vision tunneling. He knew they were coming after him 5 years before he disappeared. Benedict scanned the document. Spousal protection clause. Survivorship rights. He removed himself as owner completely, made you sole legal holder. Why? I asked, though I was already calculating the answer. Because of what happened to my mother, Benedict said quietly. Rufus went after her in divorce, tied her up in litigation until she ran out of money. Alaric learned from that. He made sure you couldn't be divorced out of your rights by giving you sole ownership. Lydia read the fine print. This is airtight. Irrevocable means they can't undo it without your signature. Sole ownership means they can't touch it while you're alive and legally competent. The pieces fell into place. The expelled wife, the forged power of attorney, the staged infidelity forcing divorce, the surveillance recordings proving mental instability, the December 15th trust signing stripping my legal standing. That's why they need you gone, Benedict said. You're not in the way, you're the owner. They can't touch it while you're alive and competent. He'd made me wealthy without telling me, protected without warning me, and in doing so painted the target on her back that would cost him his freedom. I held the deed, my name typed, as sole owner of holdings I'd never known existed. The equity they'd been trying to steal. The trust they'd been engineering. The offshore structures they'd been laundering through. All of it mine, legally irrevocably mine. Alaric hadn't just anticipated the conspiracy, he'd turned me into the very thing they needed to destroy to succeed. Every expulsion, every forged document, every drugging wasn't cruelty. It was systematic elimination of the legal obstacle I'd unknowingly become. The DNA kit, I said quietly. If I own this equity, the DNA kit exists for a reason. Corinne pulled out her phone. Gene Tech Diagnostics, we need priority processing for forensic evidence, Federal Task Force authorization. Whose DNA, Lydia asked. I looked at Benedict, the half-brother. They'd written out the family disappointment, the man who'd appeared at exactly the right moment. I think, I said slowly, we're about to find out whether Benedict's bloodline is as legitimate as Alaric believed, and whether the entire inheritance structure they've been protecting is built on fraud. Because if Benedict was Rufus's biological son, if DNA proved legitimate lineage, then the will, excluding him the trust, bypassing him the equity, they'd spent 5 years trying to steal, might all be contestable. And if I owned the equity and Benedict had legitimate inheritance claim together, we held enough legal leverage to dismantle the entire conspiracy. But first, we needed to know what was on that USB drive, and whose truth the DNA kit was designed to expose. The DNA evidence didn't wait. By 2 p.m. the same day, we were at Gene Tech Diagnostics with the forensic kit watching a lab technician break the factory seal under Corinne's documentation protocols. The forensic DNA kit sat on the laboratory table in its vacuum-sealed evidence bag, and the question that had haunted me since the vault opening finally demanded an answer whose genetic profile had Alaric preserved so carefully that he'd locked it away with equity transfer documents worth $28 million. The technician, wearing sterile gloves and working under UV lighting, extracted 2 sealed vials from the kit. Each contained a preserved cotton swab with genetic material. The labels were handwritten in Alaric's architectural lettering. Sample ABD, Sample BRW, Benedict Delaney, Rufus Whitfield. He collected comparison samples, Corinne said quietly, photographing each vial. This isn't just documentation, it's a paternity challenge kit. The lab analysis took 40 minutes. When the geneticist returned with printed results, her expression was carefully neutral, the look medical professionals get when they're about to deliver news that rewrites family histories. Sample labeled BD, Corinne read from the report. Genetic markers consistent with Rufus Whitfield paternal lineage, inconsistent with documented family tree. Benedict stood frozen beside me, his face gone pale. He kept proof, Benedict said finally, his voice hollow. Proof that I'm legitimate, that they lied about my mother, about me. I looked at the report, my forensic training automatically processing the implications. Genetic markers didn't lie. DNA didn't care about family narratives or legal documents or decades of being called illegitimate. If you're the legitimate heir, I said slowly, then the entire trust structure, the December 15th signing, it's all built on fraudulent lineage claims. The family disappointment was the rightful heir, and Alaric had died keeping that secret locked in a vault. This requires court-ordered validation testing for legal standing, the geneticist added. But these samples provide probable cause for a formal lineage challenge. Benedict sank into the chair, holding the report like it might dissolve. Alaric knew. All those years he knew I was Rufus's legitimate son, and he never... His voice broke. Why didn't he tell me? Because telling you would have put you in danger, I said quietly. The same danger he ended up in. If you'd challenged the inheritance while they were planning to eliminate him, you'd have become another target. Corinne was already on her phone. Lydia needs to see this. If Benedict has legitimate bloodline claim to the primary inheritance and you own the equity shares outright, then the trust they're trying to force Morris to sign on December 15th has no legal foundation. Before I show you what the camcorder footage actually contained, are you still with me? Comment A, if you think Myrtle was coerced into helping, or B, if you think she orchestrated the whole thing, and add one reason why in 5 to 10 words. Quick note: the next part includes fictionalized details added to deepen the emotional impact. What matters is the lesson behind it. 2 days later, on November 18th at 9:30 a.m., we gathered in the Safe House media room as Benedict's data recovery specialist extracted a hidden video partition from the estate surveillance archives footage Rufus thought he'd deleted permanently. The specialist, a woman who'd spent 15 years recovering evidence for federal cases, pulled up the file tree. Nested inside a corrupted system folder, amateur deletion attempt. They probably thought reformatting the drive would erase it. She clicked play. The footage was grainy but clear enough. The estate study, March 14, 2021 timestamp, 11:32 p.m., 2 minutes before the edited footage we'd already seen. But this version showed what happened before Rufus drugged Alaric's water. Myrtle stood behind a handheld camcorder mounted on a tripod, one eye pressed to the viewfinder. Her distinctive platinum ring with the family crest caught the study lighting the same ring she wore to every family dinner, every charity gala, every carefully orchestrated public appearance. Wait until he turns to the cabinet. Myrtle's voice came through clearly on the audio track. 3 drops, not 4. Make it look natural. Rufus, visible in the frame, pulled the small vial from his pocket. Practiced, rehearsed. Good, Myrtle continued, her voice calm and measured. Now position yourself by the desk. When he comes back, you'll start with the asset protection line we discussed. Corinne paused the playback on frame 127. The platinum family crest ring clearly visible on Myrtle's left hand as she adjusted the camera focus. Frame 127. Platinum family crest ring matches estate inventory photos from insurance records. Corinne said, documenting everything. Undeniable identification. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was seeing. She wasn't turning a blind eye to her husband drugging their son, I said, my voice hollow. She was directing the shot. A mother filming her husband poison her son not with tears or protest, but with a director's eye for the perfect angle. The footage continued. After Rufus positioned the vial, Myrtle's voice came through again. Remember, you're protecting family assets from his reckless decisions. You're the concerned father. Show disappointment, not anger. Staging, rehearsal, direction. Alaric appeared in the frame, walking to the file cabinet, turning his back exactly as Myrtle had instructed. Rufus moved with the precision of someone following a script. 3 drops into the water glass, exactly as directed. Cut there, Myrtle said as Rufus recapped the vial. We'll resume recording in 90 seconds when the sedation takes initial effect. The timestamp jumped exactly 90 seconds, and when it resumed, Alaric was reaching for his water glass, still unaware. Corinne stopped the playback. Audio forensics can confirm her voice profile. The ring provides visual identification. The timestamp metadata proves this was recorded before the edited version. It's admissible. I watched the frozen frame, Myrtle Whitfield behind her camcorder platinum ring, glinting face calm and focused. Not complicit, not coerced, not even reluctant. She was the architect. If she'd orchestrated Alaric's drugging with such calculated precision, what role had she played in the 4 years he'd been missing? What had she directed that we hadn't found footage of yet? And the camcorder footage was just one file on the USB drive. The recovery specialist's screen showed the full directory, 18 video files total. We'd only watched one. 17 more waited. 17 more pieces of evidence that Alaric had collected, preserved and hidden in a vault with the equity transfer that made me powerful enough to use them. The question was what the other 17 files would reveal, and whether we had enough time before December 15th to turn evidence into prosecution. I watched the remaining 17 camcorder files through the night, each one a meticulous record of Myrtle's pharmaceutical choreography, 17 instances where my mother had been rendered compliant, 17 opportunities for someone to rewrite her intentions. By dawn on November 20th, I had a criminal case against a household manager. What I didn't have was proof that Zyla had orchestrated any of it. At 11:47 p.m. that same night, my phone buzzed with coordinates. I didn't recognize an industrial parking lot in Charlotte where Anouk Garrett waited beneath a sodium vapor light, hands shaking as she held up her JP Morgan employee badge with a single word scrawled across the back in Sharpie hostage. "I'm not what you think," she said before I'd even closed my car door. Her voice carried the flat effect of someone who'd rehearsed this confession for weeks. I didn't help Zyla because I wanted to. I helped because Oscar Hampton has my Series 7 license, my FINRA credentials, and photographs of transactions I made under duress 3 years ago that would end my career and possibly my freedom. The parking lot was empty except for her Nissan and the distant hum of the interstate. I kept my hand near the pepper spray in my pocket. Why tell me now? Because he told me to arrange a wire transfer tomorrow that would liquidate the last liquid asset your mother controls, $4.2 million in municipal bonds. After that, there's nothing left to steal, which means there's nothing left keeping any of us alive. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to a text thread with a 919 area code. He doesn't text me instructions. He texts me reminders about what he's holding over me. Remember March 2022, or your license looks good on my desk. I've been a hostage for 26 months. I read the messages. They were masterpieces of plausible deniability. Nothing explicitly criminal, everything implicitly threatening. If you're a hostage, why not go to the police? Because the transactions I made in March 2022 were illegal. I moved client funds through shell accounts to cover what I thought was a temporary shortfall. Oscar engineered the shortfall, then offered to fix it in exchange for future cooperation. I'm a criminal who's being blackmailed by another criminal. The police won't see me as a victim, they'll see me as an accomplice. A freight train roared past on the nearby tracks, its metallic shriek swallowing our words for 30 seconds. I watched Anouk's face in the stuttering light of the passing cars, saw the exhaustion, the relief of finally speaking the truth, the terror of what came next. When the silence returned, it felt heavier than before. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Wire the $4.2 million to an account I control, but don't tell anyone. Let me disappear with enough money to start over somewhere Oscar can't find me. In exchange, I'll testify to everything: the coercion, the shell accounts Zyla used, the timeline of every fraudulent transfer." I didn't agree. I didn't refuse. I took her number and told her I'd think about it, which we both knew meant I'd investigate whether her hostage story was real or just another layer of misdirection. On November 22nd at 2:15 p.m., I got my answer, though not in the way I expected. I'd driven to the Whitfield estate in Asheville to retrieve additional financial documents my mother had mentioned storing in the garage safe. The house was empty. Zila had texted that she'd be in Charlotte until evening. I'd been inside for 47 minutes, long enough to find the documents, long enough to photograph 3 more incriminating emails on the desktop computer Zyla had carelessly left unlocked. When I returned to my car and pressed the brake pedal, it sank to the floor with zero resistance. I didn't drive. I didn't even start the engine. I called Clifford Dalton, the forensic mechanic Lydia Brennan had recommended, after I mentioned my growing paranoia about being followed. He arrived within 90 minutes, slid under my Toyota on a creeper, and emerged 8 minutes later with a section of brake line that had been partially severed, not enough to fail immediately, but enough to fail catastrophically during highway driving. "Professional job," Clifford said, photographing the cut with a macro lens. They used a circular scoring technique that degrades the line over the first 15 to 20 applications of the brake pedal. By the time you hit the interstate, you'd have no stopping power, and the failure would look like metal fatigue rather than sabotage. He pointed to the tool marks. This wasn't some opportunistic vandalism. Whoever did this has done it before. Zyla's text from that morning glowed on my phone screen. "House is yours today. Make yourself comfortable." I'd thought it was an olive branch, a sign she'd accepted my presence in our mother's life. What it actually was, I now understood, was an invitation to die on a mountain road where accidents were common and investigations were cursory. Clifford sealed the brake line in an evidence bag. "You should file a police report." "I will," I said, though I was already calculating a different move. But first, I need to know how many times this has happened before. He looked at me with the expression of someone who'd just realized he'd stepped into something far larger than a simple sabotage case. You think this is habitual? I thought about the wine glass that started everything about Myrtle's 17 recorded druggings, about Anouk's 26 months of coerced complicity, about my mother's paranoid fantasies that were turning out to be documented realities. The break line wasn't an escalation, it was a pattern finally revealing itself. I think, I said slowly, that the Whitfield family has been orchestrating accidents for a very long time. I just need to figure out how many and who didn't survive them. Clifford handed me the evidence bag. Inside, the severed brake line curled like a question mark, still glistening with hydraulic fluid, and something else, a faint residue, that suggested the tool used to cut it had been used many times before. I filed the official police report regarding the severed brake line on November 23rd, but by then I had already made peace with a much darker, more labyrinthine truth. Traditional law enforcement was equipped to document isolated crimes, but they lacked the scope, the resources, or the vision to map the full sprawling conspiracy. That heavy burden belonged to me alone. Which is why on November 25th at exactly 10:15 a.m. I descended deep into the subterranean State Notary Archive vault in Charlotte, an institutional fortress buried 38 feet underground, strictly temperature controlled at a chilly 65 degrees Fahrenheit to preserve the county's history. I was searching for the original power of attorney I had signed 4 years ago, back when I still believed in the safety of legal safeguards before someone maliciously turned my own signature into a weapon designed to destroy me. The vault itself smelled faintly of preserved betrayal chemical treatments and decaying paper stock. Aisle K7 housed the master documents for every single notarized instrument filed in Mecklenburg County since 1987, organized meticulously by filing date and document classification. Mine sat silently in a heavy fireproof protective sleeve marked with the designation Whitfield/POA/072421 securely fastened with the state registrar's official red stamp. I had brought Eleanor Voss with me to ensure absolute precision. A highly respected certified forensic document examiner, currently in her mid-50s, Eleanor wore her specialized magnification visor and thick latex gloves like surgical tools. She had spent over 23 grueling years analyzing questioned documents, forged signatures, and altered wills for both state and federal courts. My trusted ally, Lydia Brennan, had called her with absolute reverence, the only woman in the state who can see lies written in ink. Eleanor opened the protective sleeve with the painstaking care of a trauma surgeon accessing a vital organ. The power of attorney document was 7 pages long, spiral-bound, with the notary's heavy metal clasp still completely intact. She began by methodically photographing each individual page under raking light to capture the microscopic surface textures of the paper, then carefully placed the controversial page 5 under a portable high-tech spectroscope. "Tell me what you see," I said, my voice barely a whisper against the hum of the climate control. She calmly adjusted the wavelength filter on the device. Pages 1 through 4, standard blue ballpoint ink with an oxidation pattern entirely consistent with 48 months of natural aging. Your signature, the notary's countersignature, the witness attestations, everything is chronologically coherent and legally sound. She flipped carefully to the next sheet. Pages 5 through 7, however, are a completely different story. I leaned in closer, my eyes straining. To my untrained eye, the physical pages looked entirely identical. The exact same heavy paper stock, the same digital font, the same margin layout. But under the precise revealing light of the spectroscope page, 5 glowed with a subtly different infrared hue. The ballpoint ink on pages 1 through 4 oxidized normally over the course of 4 years. Eleanor explained, her voice clinically precise and devoid of emotion. Pages 5 through 7, 10 weeks maximum. Someone physically removed the original sheets and substituted these new ones long after your signing ceremony took place. The entire room seemed to tilt beneath my feet, the cold air suddenly suffocating. "I signed a healthcare directive," I whispered, the realization cutting through me. "They turned it into a blank check. More than that," Eleanor pointed a gloved finger to the notary seal embossed across pages 6 and 7. This seal was applied after the substitution occurred. Whoever orchestrated this fraud had access to the notary's unique embosser after the fact. Either they stole it, borrowed it, or the notary themselves was actively complicit in the crime. That is felony forgery with a 20-year maximum ceiling, plus notary fraud, plus identity theft for using your original signature page as the anchor for the lie. I thought about the trusted family lawyer who had arranged the signing, the pleasant notary who had smiled so reassuringly while I initialed each page, and the witnesses who had watched me sign what I honestly believed was a simple medical safety net. 4 years ago, I trusted the process, trusted the professionals, and trusted that a power of attorney meant I was protecting my family's future. Instead, someone had cold-bloodedly turned that trust into industrial-grade fraud. Can you testify to this in a court of law? I asked, looking at the trapped document. Eleanor carefully sealed the papers inside a secure evidence bag. I can testify with absolute scientific certainty that pages 5 through 7 are forensically inconsistent with the original instrument, that the substitution occurred post-notarization, and that the ink dating proves extreme timeline manipulation. A jury will easily understand that someone rebuilt your signature into authorization you never gave. I left the vault holding the heavy evidence bag, grounded by a terrifying new certainty. Zyla had not just exploited my mother's coerced consent. She had manufactured it from whole cloth using stolen authority and a forged addendum to create a flawless legal cover for systematic theft. 3 days later, on November 28th at 6:30 p.m., I walked into an unmarked police staging area in Charlotte, expecting a standard briefing with Corinne Weaver regarding the forged POA. What I found instead was a high-security conference room displaying official FBI signage, a massive digital evidence board mapping complex international financial transaction flows, and a stern man in a bureau windbreaker. His credentials were clipped to his leather belt beside a standard-issue service weapon. He stepped forward and introduced himself as Clifford Dalton. Mrs. Whitfield, I am the field coordinator for the Joint Federal-Local Financial Crimes Task Force. He said, his demeanor methodical and precise. Agent Weaver has been embedded in your case since the initial breakline incident triggered our wire fraud investigation. I turned slowly to Corinne, who sat at the long conference table with the exact same calm, unreadable expression she had maintained throughout our previous meetings. Agent Weaver, FBI Financial Crimes Unit, she stated simply without an ounce of apology. The private investigator credential was bureau cover. We have been actively building a massive RICO case against your in-laws since August, but we desperately required a cooperating witness with direct legal access to the inner workings of the estate. You provided that. The room suddenly felt much smaller, the walls closing in. So every private conversation we have had was documented, recorded with your implicit consent under federal investigation protocols, and is fully admissible in federal court. Clifford finished smoothly. You are not in trouble, Mrs. Whitfield. You are a crucial civilian consultant on an active federal task force. Everything you have uncovered on your own, the drugging videos, the forged POA, the hidden shell, accounts perfectly supports our wire fraud and elder abuse prosecution. Corinne pulled up a high-resolution satellite image on the digital board. Our Montana raid window is exactly 17 days, one shot. If we spook them before the tactical extraction, Alaric disappears permanently. December 15th is when the equity defaults entirely to their conservatorship. I said, my eyes scanning the timeline. If he is alive, we have exactly 17 days to find him and prove it. Clifford nodded grimly, adjusting his watch. Rules of engagement are clear: a federal warrant executed by a bureau tactical team fully supported by local law enforcement. You will be on site as a civilian consultant for identification purposes, but you must stay behind the secure perimeter until the property is completely secured. Strict evidence preservation protocols apply. Everything we extract gets immediate chain of custody documentation. 17 days. 408 hours. Somewhere in the frozen, remote wilderness of Montana, Alaric was either waiting to be found or he was already beyond rescue. As the task force meeting finally broke up at 8:15 p.m., Corinne walked over and handed me a thin manila folder marked Whitfield Ancillary, cleared for civilian consultant. Inside were surveillance photographs of the Montana property dated November 27th. The high-resolution images showed a weathered cabin with a stone chimney, a large satellite dish, and in the frosted north window a silhouette that perfectly matched Alaric's distinct height and build. "He is there," Corinne said quietly, her finger tracing the dark outline on the paper. "But so is someone else." I looked closer at the print under the harsh fluorescent lights. In the cabin's south window, partially obscured by heavy curtains, a second silhouette stood motionless, shorter, broader, watching the snow fall. I spent November 29th through December 1st analyzing the Montana surveillance photos trying to identify the second silhouette. Height, build, posture, nothing matched known family associates. Corinne said the Bureau's facial recognition couldn't get a clean angle through the cabin's south window. We had 11 days until the equity default and our intel was incomplete. Then at 12:40 a.m. on December 2nd, I watched through fog-blurred windshield glass as Benedict Delaney shook hands with Anouk Garrett in the deserted rear lot of a shuttered restaurant, and every operational detail I'd shared with him over the past 6 weeks became a weapon pointed at Alaric's life. I'd followed Benedict from his apartment in Myers Park after receiving an anonymous text. "Your heir is meeting the hostage. Midnight, Cordelia's kitchen rear lot." No signature, no callback number. I'd almost dismissed it as misdirection until I saw his Audi pull into the fog-shrouded parking lot at 12:38 a.m. Anouk arrived 2 minutes later in her Nissan parking beside him with headlights extinguished. They exited simultaneously, met between the vehicles, exchanged words I couldn't hear through my closed windows 60 feet away. Then Benedict handed her an envelope, left hand to right hand, 30-second exchange, the kind of practiced handoff that suggested rehearsal. I whispered into my phone's voice recorder. Subject: Delaney. Physical contact with known coerced asset. Garrett. Transaction complete 0043 hours. Envelope transfer observed. My voice sounded clinical, detached, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. They spoke for 18 minutes. At one point, Anouk gestured toward the interstate with what looked like urgency. Benedict nodded, placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, reassurance or coordination I couldn't tell. The fog made everything spectral, unreal, but the envelope was solid evidence. I'd vouched for Benedict to Corinne 3 days ago, told her he was trustworthy because he had no financial motive. Alaric had already named him sole heir to the legitimate estate, the portions not covered by the irrevocable transfer to Honora. This gave Benedict a legitimate claim to certain assets, while Honora held the majority equity. The portions Zyla couldn't touch. Why would he sabotage a raid that would restore his father and secure his inheritance? But watching him clasp Anouk's hand in what looked like gratitude before they separated, I understood maybe the inheritance was leverage, not motive. Maybe someone had offered him more. Maybe blood meant nothing when the price was right. They departed at 1:03 a.m., Anouk heading south toward the interstate, Benedict returning north toward Myers Park. I sat in the parking lot for another 12 minutes, documenting timestamps, cataloging my stupidity. I'd built my entire case on the premise that blood couldn't be trusted, and here was Benedict Alaric's biological son proving DNA was just another variable in the equation of betrayal. At 9:30 a.m. on December 3rd, I walked into the task force briefing room, prepared to arrest Benedict myself if necessary. Instead, I found him sitting beside Corinne at the conference table, looking exhausted but calm, with a thick evidence binder marked Hampton Ancillary spread between them. Corinne saw my expression and held up one hand. "Before you say anything, Mrs. Whitfield, let's establish timeline and authorization." Benedict met my eyes without flinching. "You followed me last night. I saw your car in my rear view around 12:20. I'm glad you did, means you're thinking like an investigator." "You met with Anouk Garrett," I said, my voice flat. "You accepted an envelope from a coerced asset while under task force operational security. Explain." "Anouk received credible threat that the family knows about Montana timeline," Benedict said, sliding a printed email across the table. At 11:52 p.m. December 1st, someone texted her a screenshot of the raid's December 13th extraction window. She had 40 minutes to transfer Oscar Hampton's internal ledger files before her communications were compromised. I was the authorized courier bureau protocol for emergency dead drops with protected assets. Corinne opened the evidence binder. Chain of custody log is clean. Benedict followed procedure, secured handoff location, documented transfer, delivered files to me at 1:47 a.m. with seals intact. But Mrs. Whitfield's concern is valid. Someone with task force access leaked operational timing to the family. That's the security breach we're now investigating. I looked at Benedict, shame burning through my analytical detachment. I thought you'd sold us out. I documented you for arrest. You did exactly what a good analyst should do, Benedict interrupted. You saw anomalous contact, you surveilled, you recorded evidence. Now let's find who actually did betray us. Corinne pulled up the task force access log on the briefing room screen. 17 names with Whitfield ancillary clearance timestamps spanning November 28th through December 2nd. One of these people accessed operational files and leaked Montana raid timing. We need to identify who. 11 days until December 15th. 17 people with operational access, and one of them was feeding intelligence to the family. But which 17 did you trust when your last certainty just evaporated in a fog-wrapped parking lot? I scanned the list. Corinne Weaver, Clifford Dalton, 3 local detectives, 2 federal prosecutors, 4 bureau analysts, Benedict Delaney, myself, and my eyes stopped cold on entry number 9, Lydia Brennan, my attorney, with data access logged at 11:47 p.m. December 1st, exactly 6 hours before Anouk's emergency handoff, 15 minutes before the family's threatening text, and 3 minutes after I'd sent Lydia an encrypted summary of the raid timeline for legal review. The woman who'd guided me through every legal filing, who'd connected me with forensic experts, who'd vouched for Clifford Dalton and Eleanor Voss and Benedict himself, her credentials had accessed the operational file right before the leak occurred. Corinne, I said quietly, pointing to the screen. Entry 9. That's my attorney. I sent her the timeline Tuesday night for privilege review. 6 hours later, Anouk gets threatened. Corinne's expression hardened. Either your attorney is compromised or someone's using her credentials. Either way, we have a problem. Corinne ordered Lydia Brennan's office surveillance footage within 90 minutes of discovering the access log entry. By 11 a.m. on December 4th, we had our answer. The footage from December 1st showed Lydia asleep at her desk at 11:47 p.m., head resting on a stack of depositions, office lights dimmed, which meant someone else had used her credentials to access Whitfield ancillary files. And my first call that afternoon wasn't to my lawyer, but to the one person who could have stolen those credentials. We need to talk, I told Corinne. Command room, 2:15, bring Clifford. At 2:15 p.m., I walked into the task force tactical command room with a printed screenshot of the access log and surveillance footage stills, showing Lydia's unconscious form time-stamped at the exact moment her credentials accessed operational files. Corinne sat at the conference table with Clifford Dalton, both wearing expressions that suggested they'd been expecting this conversation. You had access to Lydia's office, I said without preamble. You've coordinated with her on evidence chain custody. You could have cloned her credentials. Corinne didn't flinch. I could have. I didn't. But I know who did because Oscar Hampton used the same technique on me 3 years ago. The room went silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. Hampton got me suspended in 2022 with planted evidence. Corinne continued, her voice flat with controlled anger. Fabricated documents suggesting I'd tampered with chain of custody logs in a financial fraud case. The evidence was sophisticated enough to trigger an 18-month bureau suspension and internal affairs investigation. This case, your case, is my rehabilitation under a microscope. I didn't leak operational details because I can't leak them. Every keystroke I make is tracked, logged, and reviewed daily by supervisors who are waiting for me to fail. Clifford opened a laptop, turned it toward me. Agent Weaver's probationary status is classified, but I'm authorized to verify it for civilian consultants with operational involvement. Her system access is read-only for Whitfield ancillary files. Every query, every file view, every login is recorded with biometric authentication. Someone cloned her old credentials before the suspension credentials that technically still exist in the archive system but shouldn't have active permissions. I studied Corinne's face looking for deception, finding only exhaustion. So Hampton compromised you archived your credentials and waited 3 years for the perfect case to deploy them. He's been planning this longer than we've been investigating it, Corinne said, which means he knew someone in your family would eventually trigger federal attention. He just needed insurance, my stolen identity, to monitor the investigation when it finally came. Trust was a currency I'd spent recklessly in October. Every family dinner, every shared confidence, every signed document. And Hampton had been counterfeiting it for 3 years, building an infrastructure of compromised identities and archived credentials, waiting for the moment when Alaric's family would fracture badly enough to require federal intervention. If it wasn't you, I said slowly, then who used the credentials to access the files? That's what we're about to find out, Clifford said. He stood, gestured toward the door. Audio Forensics Lab, 10 a.m., December 6th. We recovered a burner phone from a nuke's emergency dead drop. It has recordings. On December 6th at 10 a.m., I stood in the FBI's Audio Forensics Lab, watching Marcus Hale, a specialist in his late 30s, wearing headphones and examining waveform displays across 3 monitors, analyze voice patterns from the recovered device. He'd spent 15 years authenticating recordings for federal cases, and Corinne said if anyone could identify the leak, it was Marcus. Voice pattern match is 97.4%, Marcus said, adjusting the frequency spectrum on his center monitor. Subject is female, age 55 to 65, regional accent consistent with Western North Carolina. Comparing against family voice samples you provided, he clicked a key. It's Myrtle Whitfield. The lab seemed to tilt. Play it. Marcus cued the first file dated March 2023. Myrtle's voice crackled through the speakers with crystalline clarity. The conservatorship petition advances to circuit court next month. Wire the usual amount to the Cayman account. My companion's art gallery debt won't service itself. Marcus displayed a transaction ledger on the right monitor. Cross-referenced with banking records a nuke provided. Oscar Hampton wired Myrtle Whitfield $847,000 between March 2023 and November 2025. 17 separate payments, each corresponding to intelligence deliveries about family legal proceedings, asset locations, and... He cued another file dated November 30th, 2025. Task Force Operations. Myrtle's voice again. The FBI schedules Montana extraction for December 10th. Adjust your positioning accordingly. And confirm the Vienna transfer. My companion's exhibition opening requires immediate liquidity. I thought about Zyla standing in the rain on October 10th, exiled to the porch for asking about her father. Thought about Myrtle's indignant performance, entitled little liar, just like her mother. The woman who'd weaponized a thunderstorm to isolate a 12-year-old child had been auctioning Alaric's location to the highest bidder while sipping wine at family dinners. She threw my daughter into the rain to punish me for asking questions, I said quietly. And all along she was selling Alaric's freedom to pay for her affair. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral. There's one more file. Timestamp December 5th, 14:22 hours. You should hear this. He pressed play. Myrtle's voice filled the lab with 7 words that turned my blood to ice. They're moving the Montana extraction to tomorrow. Adjust accordingly. I looked at Corinne. Tomorrow was December 6th. Today. Did the task force authorize a schedule change? No, Corinne said, her voice carefully controlled. We didn't. Which means either Myrtle was fed false intel to expose her, she paused, or someone else is running a parallel operation we don't control. The December 6th extraction date was bait. Corinne confirmed it 30 minutes after Marcus played the final recording. The task force had fed Myrtle false operational details through compromised channels to confirm her as the leak. Real extraction timeline remained classified, known only to 5 people, and I wasn't one of them until December 8th. When the question I asked in the federal briefing room wasn't why Oscar Hampton had kept Alaric alive for 4 years, but why he'd needed to keep both Alaric and his father Rufus breathing. The answer sat on 3 projected screens, showing $427 million in clean energy shell corporations locked behind a two-person cryptographic authorization that required both men's biometric signatures to release a single dollar. Corinne stood at the front of the briefing room at 3 p.m., manipulating the center display to show a web of offshore accounts spanning 12 jurisdictions. Benedict sat beside me, his expression hardening as the financial architecture became clear. The offshore shell corporations require dual biometric authorization, Corinne said, highlighting 6 key accounts. Hampton can't liquidate without both signatures Alaric's and Rufus's. That's why your husband is still breathing. Dead men can't authenticate transactions. Benedict leaned forward. My grandfather refused to sign after the initial setup in 2021. He realized Hampton was using the clean energy investments as a laundering front and threatened to expose everything. Hampton needed leverage, so he took Alaric. $427 million in digital escrow, and the only 2 keys to unlock it are biometrically tethered to men who hate each other. I stared at the projected figures, watching them resolve from abstract theft into concrete motive. He's been alive this whole time because he's worth more as a cryptographic key than a corpse. Exactly, Corinne said. Hampton keeps Alaric captive but alive, uses that captivity as leverage against Rufus to extract periodic authorizations, and maintains plausible deniability by keeping the family convinced Alaric abandoned them voluntarily. It's financial hostage infrastructure. The screen showed transaction timestamps spanning 48 months. Small authorizations, sporadic releases, just enough to keep Hampton's network liquid without triggering federal wire fraud thresholds. Alaric had been reduced to a biological password, imprisoned not for revenge, but for access. If Rufus stops cooperating, I said slowly, Hampton loses $427 million. And if Alaric dies, Hampton loses the leverage that keeps Rufus compliant, Benedict finished. It's a 3-way deadlock. That's why the equity conservatorship deadline matters. December 15th, Zyla's inheritance defaults to family trust control. Hampton gets legal authority without needing Rufus's cooperation. 4 years, 1,427 days. My husband had been breathing, eating, existing somewhere as a human encryption key, while his family grieved a man who'd never actually left. On December 10th at 11:20 a.m., I was helping Zyla pack her safe house belongings when the metal detector at the facility's security checkpoint triggered an alert. Her worn plush bear, the one she'd carried through every custody exchange, every supervised visit, every night she'd asked if Daddy was coming home, contained a military-grade GPS microtransmitter sewn into the left shoulder seam. Clifford Dalton appeared within 8 minutes, his expression carefully neutral as he examined the bear under fluorescent light in the safe house playroom. We flagged the Whitfield accounts in 2021, Clifford said, his voice measured. Standard protocol when financial crimes investigations identify vulnerable family members who might become leverage points. Zyla's bear was accessible, portable, emotionally significant. We embedded a tracker during a routine FBI safety audit of the estate. Zyla stood frozen in the doorway, her face cycling through confusion, betrayal, and something harder to name. You've been tracking me for 4 years like I'm a criminal. Like you're someone worth protecting, Clifford said quietly. That chip's telemetry helped us backtrack every family gathering, every custody exchange, every location where threats were made against your mother. It kept you visible when they tried to isolate you. 4 years ago, someone had sewn surveillance into my daughter's favorite toy, and I couldn't decide whether to thank them or rage at them. Protection and violation wore the same uniform when you were desperate enough. On December 11th, at 8:45 a.m., that same GPS telemetry triangulated with satellite imaging led us to Clearwater Mountain Resort in Montana, an abandoned property whose deed showed Shell Corporation ownership traced directly to Rufus Whitfield's offshore holdings. Corinne displayed the property records on the satellite imaging lab's main screen, while Benedict and I stood behind her watching 4 years of captivity resolve into GPS coordinates. Clearwater Mountain Resort, Montana, Corinne said, overlaying utility records on the satellite feed. Purchased 2019, officially closed 2020 due to financial restructuring, but utility records show continuous power and water usage totaling $1.38 million over 48 months. Someone's been living there. 1,427 days. I said, my voice hollow. She looked me in the eye at Zyla's birthday last year and said Alaric had probably started a new life in Europe. Benedict pulled up county records on a secondary terminal. The property deed lists a maintenance trust with annual inspection requirements. Every signature for the past 4 years. He turned the screen toward me. Myrtle Whitfield trustee. She knew. The whole time she knew exactly where he was. How many times had Myrtle sat across from Zyla at mandatory family dinners, watched a 12-year-old ask if Daddy was ever coming home, smiled with practiced sympathy, and then signed another maintenance report for the mountain facility, where Daddy was locked behind biometric authorization breathing, just enough to keep $427 million accessible. Corinne adjusted the satellite overlay, increasing resolution on the property boundaries. A second structure appeared 200 meters north of the main resort building, smaller, partially obscured by pine forest, with thermal imaging showing heat signature consistent with active HVAC system, and 2 distinct body masses. One matched baseline adult male parameters. The other was significantly smaller. Corinne, I said slowly, my pulse accelerating. Who's the second person in that building? The second thermal signature turned out to be server equipment and HVAC machinery, maintaining minimal climate control in a concrete basement where Oscar Hampton had engineered 4 years of captivity with industrial precision. The federal search warrant for Clearwater Mountain Resort landed on Judge Whitmore's desk, a federal district judge in Helena, at 4:17 a.m. on December 13th, and by 6:45 a.m. was strapped into a tactical command vehicle, watching 18 agents in Kevlar gear run final breach protocols against a building where my husband had been breathing for 1,427 days. Clifford Dalton stood beside the command vehicle's open rear door, reviewing digital warrant documentation on a tablet while morning light broke over the Montana ridgeline. Lieutenant Reeves, the FBI tactical team lead, with 22 years of hostage rescue experience, coordinated breach timing with precision that made the operation feel more like surgery than law enforcement. Warrant covers both structures, all utility access points, and financial records seizure. Clifford said, his breath forming clouds in the December cold. Thermal imaging confirms 2 heat signatures in the secondary building's basement level. Primary signature adult male height and mass parameters consistent with Alaric Whitfield. Secondary signature stationary mechanical, likely server equipment or climate control maintaining livable temperature. And the person-sized signature from the satellite feed. I asked, my hands locked around a thermal coffee cup I hadn't actually drunk from in 2 hours. Resolution artifacts, Corinne said from inside the command vehicle, monitoring real-time feeds from drone surveillance. At that altitude and angle, HVAC ducting can read as human-scale mass. Ground-level thermal is definitive 1 captive mechanical support systems, no guards on site. Benedict stood outside the vehicle perimeter, speaking quietly into his phone, coordinating with Rufus. I assumed preparing the biometric authorization protocols that would need to happen once Alaric was stabilized. $427 million in offshore accounts waited for dual signatures, and we were 43 hours from the December 15th deadline when equity control would default to conservatorship. You stay in the command vehicle until the site is secured and subject formally identified, Corinne said, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Medical extraction team is staged 300 meters north. Once Lieutenant Reeves confirms identity and medical status, you'll have access for formal recognition. I wanted to argue. Wanted to demand immediate entry. Wanted to be the first person Alaric saw after 1,427 days. But tactical operations didn't accommodate emotional need, and the warrant specified civilian consultants remained behind defensive perimeter until threat assessment cleared. 1,700 kilometers south in Charlotte, Zyla sat in a safe-house playroom clutching the GPS-embedded bear that had tracked her for 4 years, waiting for a phone call that would tell her whether her father was alive or whether alive was just another word for evidence. I wondered which would break her more, learning he was breathing, or learning what breathing looked like after 1,427 days in a concrete cell. The breach happened at 8:15 p.m. on December 14th, delayed 27 hours by secondary warrant requirements and weather conditions that grounded aerial medical support until wind speeds dropped below operational thresholds. I watched through command vehicle monitors as Lieutenant Reeves led the tactical stack through the resort's main structure clearing rooms with methodical efficiency until they reached the basement access point, hidden behind a false utility panel. The radio crackled. Basement level secured. Subject located alive responsive. Medical, we need immediate thermal support and IV access. He's hypothermic and dehydrated. My hands started shaking. Corinne placed one hand on my shoulder, steadying me physically and emotionally. He's breathing. That's the first victory. Let the medical team stabilize him. Through the command feed, I watched thermal blankets deployed, watched medics establish IV lines, watched a man who'd weighed 187 pounds 4 years ago respond weakly to stimuli with a body that looked skeletal, even through tactical camera resolution. His wrists showed restraint abrasions. His face carried the hollow exhaustion of someone who'd stopped expecting rescue months ago. The medical coordinator played recorded audio. Zyla's voice captured that morning in the safe house, specifically for this moment. "Dad, it's Zyla. Mom found you. We're here. You're safe now." Alaric's eyes opened. His lips moved with excruciating slowness. The command vehicle's audio enhancement caught his whispered response. "Lee, 14. 14 years old." The medical coordinator confirmed gently. "Your daughter is safe. Your wife is 300 meters away. We're extracting you to Federal Medical Facility." Tears ran down my face unchecked. Corinne handed me a radio headset. "You can speak to him now. Keep it brief, he's severely compromised." I pressed the transmit button, my voice barely functional. "Alaric, it's me. We found you. Zyla's safe. You're coming home." The pause felt eternal. Then his voice fractured but unmistakable. "Couldn't sign. Told them. Never." "I know," I said. "You don't have to explain. Just breathe. Just stay with us." As the medical team prepared transport, a technician cut away the electronic monitoring cuff, locked around Alaric's left ankle. Corinne's tablet lit up immediately with incoming telemetry data. The device had transmitted constant GPS coordinates, vital signs, and motion sensors to an encrypted receiver for the entire captivity period. The ankle cuff wasn't just restraint, it was a beacon, and someone 3 states away had just watched them find him. Corinne's expression hardened as she read the transmission log. "Last data packet went out 47 seconds ago, time-stamped with breach coordinates and automated alert, compromised. Whoever was monitoring this feed knows exactly where we are, and that Alaric is no longer captive." "Can you trace the receiver?" I asked. "Working on it," she said. "But they've had 4 years to build contingency protocols. If they're smart, they're already destroying evidence." Corinne traced the encrypted receiver within 8 minutes. It terminated at a burner phone registered to a Charlotte prepaid account purchased with cash in March 2021. The billing records showed the device had been active for 47 months, receiving constant telemetry from Alaric's ankle cuff. 12 minutes after the compromised alert, transmitted Myrtle Whitfield's rental sedan arrived at the Montana resort perimeter. She stepped into the snow-covered courtyard at 9:52 p.m., with her hands raised in apparent surrender, and I noticed 3 things immediately. Her platinum wedding ring was missing. Her designer coat bulged asymmetrically at the right hip, and she wasn't looking at Lieutenant Reeves's tactical team. She was looking directly at Rufus, who'd just emerged from the command vehicle, expecting vindication for his role in providing the offshore property intelligence that had led us here. "I'm prepared to cooperate," Myrtle called out, her voice carrying across the courtyard with theatrical precision. "Full disclosure on Oscar Hampton's network account access codes, everything. I want immunity and witness protection." Lieutenant Reeves advanced with 2 agents flanking him. "Ma'am, keep your hands visible and move slowly toward." Myrtle's right hand dropped to her coat pocket with practiced speed, emerging with a .38 revolver that she leveled not at the tactical team, but at Rufus, who froze 3 meters from the command vehicle with his mouth opening in confusion. You gave her 3.2 million, Myrtle said, her voice fracturing with rage I'd never heard beneath her carefully cultivated composure. While my son rotted in a basement, you redirected joint assets to finance your decade-long affair with that gallery curator in Asheville. You chose her over blood. Rufus raised his hands, his face cycling through denial and calculation. You sold him first? You took Hampton's money for 4 years. The first shot hit Rufus in the chest. The second caught him in the abdomen as he collapsed backward into the snow. Lieutenant Reeves's team moved instantly, tackling Myrtle and securing the weapon, but the damage was absolute and irreversible. I ran to Rufus, despite Corinne's shouted warning, dropping to my knees in snow that was already turning red. His eyes found mine with desperate clarity, his breath coming in shallow gasps. You sold him first. He whispered again, the words directed at Myrtle, who was being restrained 15 feet away. Then his breathing stopped, and the man who'd engineered his son's disappearance through offshore property arrangements and biometric authorization schemes died in the same Montana snow where he'd built Alaric's 4-year prison. The medics arrived within 90 seconds, but CPR attempts were procedural formality. Rufus Whitfield was pronounced dead at 10:08 p.m. on December 14th, killed not by federal agents or criminal rivals, but by his own wife, who discovered that even conspirators could be betrayed when greed wore a familiar face. Families were supposed to be safety nets, not firing squads, but the Whitfields had spent 4 years proving that blood was just another liquid asset to be liquidated when the price was right. Myrtle had sold Alaric's location to Hampton for $847,000. Rufus had sold his loyalty to finance an extramarital relationship. And somewhere in a concrete basement, their son had paid the compounded interest on both transactions for 1,427 days. On December 15th at 2:30 p.m., exactly 17 hours after Rufus died, and precisely on schedule with the equity conservatorship deadline that would now never trigger, I stood in a federal detention processing facility in Charlotte, watching Oscar Hampton processed through intake procedures with methodical precision that felt almost anticlimactic after the Montana courtyard's violence. Corinne stood beside me in the observation gallery as a federal prosecutor read 17 counts of indictment into the record kidnapping conspiracy to commit murder, money laundering, wire fraud, elder abuse, evidence tampering, and 11 additional charges that collectively carried sentencing guidelines of 25 to 40 years minimum. Oscar Hampton, you're under federal arrest, Corinne said through the intercom system, her voice carrying the weight of 4 years of investigation. Evidence chain is sealed and prosecution ready. You have the right to remain silent, though I suspect your attorney will advise that quite strongly. Oscar looked up at the observation window, his expression shifting from calculated composure to something approaching panic. Myrtle will testify. She'll corroborate that I acted under duress from Rufus, that the biometric authorization scheme was his design. Myrtle's in custody for homicide, Corinne interrupted. Her testimony's worthless. Even if it weren't, we have 4 years of audio recordings where she negotiated payment for intelligence she provided voluntarily. You're both done. I watched Oscar's face collapse as he realized the conspiracy had no remaining architecture. Myrtle was facing murder charges. Rufus was dead. A nuke had flipped to federal protection. The offshore accounts were frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings. There was no one left to coordinate a defense. No one left to obstruct evidence. No one left to engineer the next layer of misdirection. It's over, I said quietly, more to myself than Corinne. 4 years, 57 days, and it's finally over. I'd imagined this moment, Hampton in handcuffs, evidence secured, legal victory, absolute. But I'd never imagined how empty triumph would feel when it arrived in a body bag and a federal processing form. Alaric was alive, but traumatized. Zyla was safe, but fractured. The family that should have protected them had destroyed itself from within, and all I'd done was document the collapse. As we left the detention facility at 4:15 p.m., Corinne handed me the evidence custody receipt. 17 exhibits, 432 pages, 1 USB drive containing 4 years of surveillance footage. The paper felt heavier than it should have weighted with implications I was too exhausted to parse. There's one more thing, Corinne said as we reached the parking garage. Alaric's medical evaluation came back from the hospital. He's physically stable, but the psychologist flagged something unusual in his initial interview. He keeps asking for someone named Elena. We don't have anyone by that name in any file. My blood went cold. Elena was Alaric's mother's name. She died 19 years ago in a car accident. Corinne's expression shifted to clinical concern. Then we need to assess whether he's experiencing trauma-induced regression or if someone else was involved in his captivity. Elena wasn't a person. It was the emergency extraction code word Alaric and I had established 16 years ago when I worked high-risk fraud cases. He'd been asking for rescue confirmation, not his deceased mother. The hospital psychologist called it remarkable operational clarity for someone who'd endured 4 years of captivity. The ballistics report arrived on December 16th with clinical precision powder residue patterns placed Myrtle Whitfield's .38 revolver at contact distance. For the first shot, self-defense from 6 inches was anatomically impossible, and the second round fired 3.4 seconds later into Rufus's chest as he fell carried the legal weight of premeditated murder. Corinne delivered the analysis in the federal prosecutor's briefing room with methodical detachment. Contact distance discharge, deliberate aim, 3-second pause before fatal shot. Security footage shows her drawing the weapon before Rufus spoke. No jury in America calls that self-defense. Her attorneys negotiating 25 to life to avoid death penalty consideration. I studied the trajectory diagrams and powder residue photographs. She spent 4 years orchestrating perfect financial crime and destroyed everything in 4 seconds of rage over money she'd already stolen. Ironic justice, Corinne said. Woman who engineered her son's captivity to control family assets loses everything via single trigger pull over her husband's affair. Through the window, I watched federal marshals escort Myrtle to transport. She looked diminished by orange detention clothing and the absence of platinum jewelry she'd worn like armor. As she passed, her voice carried across the courtyard. He gave away my money. Everything I protected, he gave it to her. Not our son rotted in Montana. Not my family was destroyed. Just my money, the only asset that had ever mattered. On December 28th at 11:30 a.m., we attempted our first normal meal in 4 years at a quiet coastal cafe where tourists wouldn't recognize the Whitfield name. Zyla sat between us, her posture carefully neutral hands, fidgeting with a napkin, the way she'd fidgeted with her GPS-embedded bear through 4 years of supervised custody exchanges. Alaric looked at me with eyes that still carried basement shadows. I need to tell you about the infidelity evidence. The hotel receipts, the phone records, the credit card statements, I planted all of it. I set down my coffee cup with measured control. Explain. Hampton called me in March 2021, said if you kept investigating the conservatorship irregularities, Zyla would be next. He showed me photographs of her school, her dance studio. Making you hate me was the only way to keep you safe. If you believed I'd abandoned the family, you'd stop investigating and focus on protecting our daughter. Zyla was 12 years old, sitting across from a father who'd missed her transition from child to adolescent, and I realized some kinds of theft couldn't be prosecuted. You couldn't indict anyone for stolen time. You made me believe my husband abandoned us, I said, keeping my voice level. You made our daughter grieve a living father for 4 years. Protection doesn't excuse that damage, Alaric. It explains it, but it doesn't erase the fracture. I know, he said quietly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to understand why. Zyla spoke for the first time since we'd sat down, her voice small and precise. I'm 10 now, almost 11. You missed 4 birthdays, Dad, 4 Christmases, 3 dance recitals and 2 science fairs, and the day I got my first period and Mom had to explain it alone in a Target bathroom because you weren't there. She looked at him with eyes too old for 12. I don't know how to be your daughter anymore. I don't know if I want to learn. The cafe sounds, clattering dishes, background conversations. Espresso machine hiss felt obscenely normal against our fractured attempt at reunion. But Alaric nodded slowly, accepting the boundaries Zyla had drawn, and I understood that recovery would be measured in years, not weeks, in small permissions gradually granted rather than dramatic reconciliation. On December 29th at 4:40 p.m., A plain parcel arrived at our temporary boardwalk rental with no return label, no postage marking. Inside my original custom necklace, the one taken during the November interrogation, and a handwritten card reading, "Some secrets meant to stay buried." I turned the card over. The reverse side bore an official Department of Justice Witness Protection Program seal with a case number and single-typed line. Civilian identity. Anouk Marie Garrett, formally terminated per 18 U.S.C. Section 3521. She'd vanished into federal anonymity forever. Her coerced cooperation rewarded with erasure. Her 26 months of hostage service converted into a new name in a new city where Oscar Hampton's network would never find her. The necklace was her final communication, the only piece of my old life she could safely return before disappearing into witness protection infrastructure. I stood on the empty boardwalk holding cold metal that felt heavier than it had 4 years ago, as if the gold had absorbed the weight of everything I'd learned about family loyalty and the difference between legal victory and actual justice. Some secrets meant to stay buried, the ones Hampton had leveraged, the ones Myrtle had hidden, the ones Alaric had fabricated. We'd built an empire of buried secrets and called it family. Behind me, the rental house glowed with warm light. Through the window, I could see Alaric and Zyla sitting in careful proximity on the couch, not touching, but present, attempting the fragile work of rebuilding trust one supervised hour at a time. I understood now what the opening trauma had taught me. Safety was never guaranteed. Family could be the deadliest conspiracy, and justice was thin earth, covering an endless abyss. But you documented the evidence, protected the vulnerable, and walked forward anyway, because the alternative was letting the abyss win. I slipped the necklace into my pocket and turned toward home, where recovery was measured in years, not rescues, and healing meant learning to walk on unstable ground without falling through. And to you listening to my story, remember this: safety was never guaranteed, and family can be the deadliest conspiracy. Looking back, I made mistakes. I ignored the warning signs at those early family dinners. I trusted the platinum rings and designer coats more than my mother's trembling hands. I didn't start documenting evidence until October 10th, when that wine glass fell, and I finally saw the sediment that had been there for years. Don't make my mistake. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything. Here's what I learned through 4 years of investigating family betrayal. Justice isn't guaranteed, but silence guarantees nothing changes. When I discovered my toxic in-laws were drugging my mother and holding my husband captive, I had a choice: stay quiet and protect myself, or fight for the truth no matter the cost. The path I chose wasn't easy, but I believe God put me through this so I could show others that even when family becomes your greatest threat, you can still reclaim your life through evidence, determination, and faith that truth eventually surfaces. The conspiracy that nearly destroyed us taught me that recovery is measured in years, not rescues. My missing husband came home, but healing the fractures will take time. We can't rush. So let me ask you, what would you have done in my position? Would you have caught that wine glass or let it shatter? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Her Drama Stories for more real accounts of survival and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. Remember, some details in this story have been adjusted for privacy and storytelling, but the lesson, the importance of documenting truth and protecting the vulnerable, remains absolutely real.